Sorry, they're not getting that room. Are you taking over there? No, they're yeah, he's gonna be over there, but the viewers aren't seeing that room. I need the dude that's running this. Where's he at? No, the guy that the one that runs this. Yeah. Yeah. Need you to use a microphone.
Thank you so much. What song was that again?
That was Theme by Metaphysical.
Theme by Metaphysical. Thank you so much. And I'm really grateful that we're able to be here today to talk about this very important topic, which is indigenous inclusion. My name is Valerie. I'm the executive director.
Really? Yeah. How was that project?
We are
Pete, send out the link. Both links that go to this.
He's streaming, they're just not getting it.
Right. The people that got links to the street attachment, they're not seeing his room.
Regardless of socioeconomic status to these companies. So we have a great.
That link in the email and get like, I'm seeing all the messages and everything.
How do you know?
We have
I have a whole feed of messages and threads.
I'm gonna just go ahead and introduce yourselves and I'll show you what you do.
Yes.
Good morning.
Have him come here. Have him come here.
My name is Jenny Whitlow.
Yes.
I'm the daughter of Kurt Whitlow and I was born and raised on the Prairie Reservation, which is located in South Dakota. I come from the second largest tribe in America, which is the Oglala. You guys are probably more familiar with like Chief Crazy Horse and people have a little bit more. I'm very aware of my sovereign rights as an indigenous woman. I was born and raised as a young girl and learned to protect our culture, our way of life. I'm aware of the persecution my people have endured throughout the years. And I'm really here just to bring education to increase the indigenous voices because a lot of, and BIPOC, just because of a lot of things are happening really quickly. It seems like it's slow for some people, but for us, I'm almost 40 years old and we've been watching this for years as a traditional market. So I'm Jenny Bickrow and I'm looking forward to
Go back.
I'm obviously mixed heritage. My work with plant medicines and indigenous communities has been pretty varied. I was part of the original Human Nature team at Oakland. I was worked with the founders of the Children's Center, also Son of Des and her daughters, bringing on Human Nature. Her daughter passed out, where she's on a three on the territory from Human Nature. I'm operations director for Human Nature Florida, and my main goal is to make sure that as plant medicine goes out, it does so in a way that has indigenous leadership, and so that people are working protecting because we're they need to be the ones who are rolling them out, and we're actually maintaining protection status over these medicines. We aren't, taken over by influences who just see them as monetary assets, but as sacred medicine.
My name is Nick Prieto. I'm founder of Flower Company and Cannabis branch. I'm also a member of Cannadelic Nature. My family came in the early 1960s. And just like the word Cubensis, it means coming from Cuba. And part of what's very important to me is understanding the plants and the companies that are native to the land that were used by our direct ancestors and how they played a role today. And also decriminalizing the use of plant medicine before legalization.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nina. I'm a from Colombia. I've been a plant medicine since I was 17 years old. It saved my life completely. When I hit 40 years, I got cancer, and plant medicine saved my life again. So for me, it's very important to hear and give information. I find out that a lot of people doesn't have the education or the national program for the plant medicine side. And I have the luck that we in the past, and they have given medicines. They raised me with homeopathy, with acupuncture, with yahe, ayahuasca, with all the beautiful plants. And 15 years from now, I'm doing 7 medicine for the last 15 years straight. And with different plant medicines. And again, like everybody says, here, it's very important for us to we're here to sign petition. And so we need to recognize that it's like it's now. Essentially, for us, it's looking at it. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is. Okay, so anyway, my name is Lucas Gerler. I wrote all my different companies on here. The company that I'm representing today is Cannadelic Plant Sciences. And one of the reasons that I had the idea for this panel and got this panel together is in line with what our company preaches and helps cross the bridge between great ideas and actual action. And so we follow the Goya protocol with the company knows that the U.S. Something that the U.S. has signed on, and our company gives 32% of all of our equity to indigenous and nonprofit groups that support indigenous groups in the environment and allow them to action that equity into different things that they see fit. One of two medicine production licenses in the United States and a bunch of different research companies and universities that we partner with. We also have a company, One Source, Role, Social Media, and a couple of things as well. So hope you guys enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you for making this possible. We really appreciate it. So we're going to start with the first question. It's for all the speakers. And it is, what does Indigenous inclusion look like? Can you do this again?
First, being included in the conversation when it comes to the psychedelics and cannabis is important because we, our people, have been doing this. And I honestly thought everybody smoked weed on my reservation. I mean, everybody did smoke weed on my reservation. But I thought everybody smoked weed outside of my reservation. And so people. We have been through a lot of trauma in school, just people, and I grew up learning about this. And so I always just thought it was normal.
I'm working on fixing the stream. Do you think you can make the audio maybe a little louder or clearer on the stream side? It's really hard to understand what's going on.
Gotcha, yeah, that's what we're pulling up over now. The Oxford, working
Yeah,
on
I'm in the other room. I'm working on getting the stream.
Copy that.
To where we're coming from as a people group, because to me, being included in this conversation is like you coming to my house and saying you guys have a plan and we really want to see this plan and we know that it helps heal people and we know that it does heal people. And because of that, we really want to use it to help other people. That's really what I want the plant medicine to be used for, is the healing powers it has. And so to be included in that conversation means being respectful of the people who actually have the plant medicine. So it's like coming to our house, knocking on my door and saying, we know that you guys have been using this for centuries. We would like for you to show us how to use this medicine. Not, I'm coming in and I'm going to tell you how to use this medicine. Those are two different conversations, right? And so to be included in this conversation means that I'm actually knocking on your door and I'm really saying, how do you guys feel? What do you guys think? And there's 528 tribes. We are a small community of people in the indigenous, like the native tribes that I know of. And so to be a part of it is just out of respect. I respect you, you respect me. It's just common courtesy. And in our cultures, we're raised to respect people. And so it's to be included in the conversation because we have been persecuted for years, told that our way of life was wrong, it was bad. You can't do this. You have to do it this way. And our people have used this medicine to help heal and keep ourselves really surviving because we have faced genocide. And so to be able to have this conversation and say, how do you guys feel about it? And how can we help you guys? Or what can we do to ensure that our people do it now? Because we need it. I'm not saying that we don't need it, we need it. I think there's so much mental health crisis going on. And so just to be respectful, that's that. Just out of respect to be included.
Thank you, Jenny. And that is very important. We have been here fighting against genocide since 1994. And we're still here.
As much as people want to say that, you know, plants have been extinct, like the Taino, which is where I come from, we're still here, you know, and that needs to be respected. We have to be able to learn from indigenous people because they know this land better than any of us, right? So that being said, Alex, with this indigenous inclusion would like to.
Thank you, Logan.
Song is really.
I would say that indigenous inclusion is a word that I personally, actually someone initially see earlier was Reggie, who said that it's not the indigenous people who are being included, it's indigenous people who are including others into this. And to me, that's what it's all about. It's about reframing this conversation around, I've worked in this space for years, and there are a lot of people who have expressed a certain mindset. They'll use words like practicality, reality, or things like that, to specifically point that these medicines are commodities, that they will be commodified, that the corporations will control them, that they will be controlled for monetary interests, and that no one is going to work with these medicines unless they're controlled by pharmaceuticals. And my perspective is, if someone doesn't want to work with these medicines in a traditional way, and they only want to work with these medicines if they're controlled by pharmaceutical companies, then they don't really need to work with these medicines in the first place. That's just my perspective. It's not saying that's the way it is, but that's my perspective. I feel that if someone doesn't have the respect that they're willing to learn about these medicines, to go to someone who's been practicing these medicines, the tradition that spans thousands of years, because they look down upon those people and they only want to work with medicine. And politicized session in a way is probably not even the best way, certainly not the best way to work with them. It may be harmful to them to work with them. And that doesn't benefit the medicines, it doesn't benefit the people, it doesn't benefit anything but pharmaceutical results. And the desire of the capitalist system for continuous and ever increasing infinite growth into every single market, by everything into value. And if we're at the stage now, currently, where that has to stop in general. And these plant medicines are sort of the final frontier. You can read any number of articles from any number of online magazines, paper magazines, who express it as a good thing that the burgeoning psychedelic industry, billion-dollar industry, and we got a good little foreplay into what that's going to look like with the cannabis industry, where you have these gigantic multi-million-dollar companies coming in, ruining the planet. Florida, you can't even get the cannabis unless you get it from somebody who gets it from California, where I'm from, because the cannabis is so bad, and it's going to cost $60 for an eighth of an ounce of cannabis, some of which is butter is moldy, and which is grown with chemicals, which is not good quality cannabis, which isn't even counted as medicine. And these corporations are posting up record profits. They're making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, while cutting out the people who have been working with these medicines, legacy growers, small-time growers, who, were once able to make a decent living, even though they had to worry about police, and still do, even though today in Florida, even though places where it's been decriminalized, people are still being arrested every day for cannabis possession. In Fort Lauderdale, a man was beaten to death after being arrested for a cannabis charge. And this is the current framework we're in right now. And now mushrooms and all of these medicines are incredibly sacred. It's not sacred to some people. It's not like it's, oh, well, it's sacred in our culture. anyone who's looked at these medicines knows they have deep intrinsic spiritual qualities. This isn't, I mean, all plants, all life is spiritual, but anybody who's looked at these medicines knows it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as, you know, drinking tea, when you drink ayahuasca. It is such a powerful portal into a higher realm, and to treat that like something that can be commodified for profit is without listening to people who have been working with people for thousands of years and who know things about these corporations don't care about, that profit doesn't care about. That is what we must have a paradigm where the people who've been working with these medicines are the ones who are showing us how to actually use them.
Thank you, Alex. And now from a Florida native, Nick, how do you feel about Indigenous inclusion here?
Yeah, so Indigenous inclusion for me is quite important. I'm a direct mix of the indigenous people of Cuba and Spanish colonizers. I recently found out that I'm 9% Taino, so
Could be more too.
could be more,
Yeah.
right? And onwards of 80% from the Iberian Peninsula. So you can like see, like almost like when they left Spain and then started inoculating the women of the land. Oftentimes,
I wouldn't say inoculating.
well, forcibly. But these plants that we're using, or fungi, specifically, named Psilocybe cubensis, it's named after the geography, and we know that the indigenous people were thriving there just onwards of 500 years ago. That's just like 5 grandparents ago. So that's not a lot of time. So if we're going to be using these fungi and studying them and extracting them and benefiting from them, especially on a financial level, the people that should be leading the way are the indigenous people that were using it. And this is an island medicine. So we can look to any of the islands from the Greater Antilles, the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, the indigenous people of Jamaica, and as we know, Jamaica is often leading.
It's also about the food medicine too. So thank you, Nick. You know, you, with all of your experience, having traveled to the rainforest, studied actual indigenous people, what does indigenous inclusion look like to you in this space?
I think it's very important. For every single medicine that I carry, it's always behind me one of our titles, and titles and mayores, which is the elders in Amazon, the Cannadelic ayahuasca. Also the mambe, which is mama coca, which is one of the very powerful medicines and very common. And being, one of our medicines. So I'm going to tell you a story how the coca is and really unique this happiness unit. In my country, the government wants to protect the power of the mama coca. They wanted to be able for them to sell it and take it away from our indigenous people. My country got up and they spoke unity and went to the streets and said, no, this belongs to the indigenous people. Which are the Mamos, which is the seventh tribe in the Amazon, the carry mama coca. And it was so strong that we won. So now the indigenous, it is fantastic. Now the indigenous have the control of the mandate of the mama coca. So when I go to my country, I just go to the stores. They have the stores from Bogota. They have the stores with the embassy of the mama coca. And I can buy there all my clothes, in powder, in creams, everything. And the money goes straight to them. A lot of people, including my brother, that facing the time, the money, and everything, they're going to kill them and they start to protect them. So one of the, it is very important. The only thing we can make this happen is united. Sign petition, united, because we are the majority. The reality, yet the pharmacologists want to take over, but they are the minority. The government, they are the minority. We are the majority. We can't get control of things. We can't be the Colombia even. We have more ways to do this. We have more power here, more avenues to make this happen. And I'm so happy to see I see this. I like going to bring out sitting here in front of me. And this is fantastic that you are coming because it's one of the steps is to unite it and make it happen. And see, before I used to bring them here. I used to bring my taita, the one that trained me, one of the ones that trained me. And I used to bring the elders here, and in one point they put them in jail. Yeah, in New York, they got one taita, an elder, like 86 years old or something like that. How old was taita? Like 86, 96 years old. We all have to save money, hire lawyers, and we are like, this is our religious right. This is our elder, and he has the right to carry the ayahuasca yahe. It took us 3 months, and finally we brought him back home. And this is happening in London. It's happening in several places, not only in the United States. So we decided that is too precious for us to bring in here. So now we go to Amazon to sit with them. And they decided they're training their kids. So the young people that come here, they're the kids of the titans. They're the ones right now running ceremonies all over the United States and everywhere, because we don't want nothing to happen to the elders, because that is where all the knowledge comes from. So that is for us, as well as the respect for all that tradition and everything that they teach us, we need to protect them. So now Mexico is very happy because Taita Kerubin, which is one of our elders, he's like 105 years old. He's still going there and run ceremonies. So if I want to sit down with him, I have to go to Mexico. So it's not only important inclusion with them, because like I say, I have every single ceremony, every single medicine that I carry, I have an elder behind me. It is that we should be able to legally bring them here. If we cannot go there like we used to do, I would love to bring my taita with his wife and all his kids and bring them here and you experience them instead to have to go there. Like, it's a great thing that now we can experience ayahuasca, yahe, San Pedro, Peyore, all these medicines. We can go to the ceremonies. So it would be great to be able to do that again. Because I would love for them, for you to sit with them and see where this is coming from and see all this knowledge and all this power that they have. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
So I'll touch just on a lot of what you guys already talked about, but I think it can be related to, I think, in a metaphor in my mind where, or I guess a different way to put it, everybody knows how to make bread, right? But if you don't put love into the bread that you make, then the bread isn't going to be good. Like, you can go to McDonald's and get bread, right? And so respecting where things came from, the traditions that brought you the knowledge that allows you to bring something into market, in my mind, there can coexist a future where there can be a medical application of a product, there can be a recreational application of a product, and there can be homegrown. They shouldn't all compete against each other. And it should be something that when we talk about bringing everybody to the table, there's a difference between bringing people to a conversation and including them in the business. And so a lot of what we are doing is trying to really be at the forefront of inclusion and doing things to get land given for cultivation, manufacturing, because if you don't have a love component in the manufacturing and the cultivation, then it doesn't really matter. And especially when you have this sacred of life forms, if you what we call the plants life forms, if you're not respecting those life forms when bringing them to market, you're going to get very different results out of the love that was or was not put into it. So anybody that's had a bad trip or anything like that, right, it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the space, the people that are around, the group setting, the lack of the group setting. When I hear of things like a 1 hour trip or, hey, I want to be able to do this in a clinical setting, that kind of scares me, but at the same time, it might be right for a person. But then at the other time, it might be better for PTSD and applications that we're working with the Veterans Benefit Administration for a group setting. And so to be able to bring that knowledge that like Jenny and her tribe has from years and years and thousands of years of using it, whereas before we looked at, well, this is science that we're bringing into it. Traditional science is science too. It's just traditionally carried on. So that's, I'll just leave it short.
Spirit science, right?
Exactly.
I love it. And I totally agree with you. You know, we can definitely have an environment where all of these models can coexist because not one shoe fits all. And we definitely do want everyone to benefit from these medicines. I think ultimately, as long as we can respect each other's differences and allow each other to coexist without any fear, that is the best thing we can do. So I really appreciate what Panacea Plant Sciences is doing with supporting indigenous communities directly, and I hope that more companies can take after that model and also start doing the same. Decriminalized Nature Decriminalized Nature Florida as an organization, me and Alex, Nick, everyone in our team has agreed that before we pass any policies at county, city levels, state levels, we want to be able to consult our indigenous elders, just like Nina, you spoke of. We want to be able to get that wisdom directly from them before making any steps, because we do want to ensure that we're moving respectfully and while also, you know, putting out policy that is making a difference. We do promote decriminalizing before legalizing, just so that we are not stuck in a legal model, just like the one we have with cannabis. Personally, I've had experiences where people have not been able to afford a medical card. And this is a reality for a lot of people, you know. And these people who can't afford a card doesn't necessarily mean they're not using the cannabis, but they are facing jail time because they don't have that legal protection of $300+ a year just for a prescription. I was that person. I needed to get it in order to ensure that as a mother, DCF wouldn't be knocking on my door because I use cannabis instead of pharmaceuticals to treat my, you know, symptoms. So ultimately, that's what I want for the entire state, to be able to live without fear and to also, you know, go back to our traditional ways of learning and healing and protecting everyone around us to be able to do the same. So I wanted to open it up. I know we don't have a lot of time, but 5 minutes, Lucas?
I think we're good with that.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for any of our panelists? Now's your time. Sure. What's your, okay. Got 2 questions. So, sir, with the Arrowwood shirt, you raised your hand first. I'm loving the t-shirt. What is your question? Okay, so love is not a physical ingredient. I agree, it's a metaphysical ingredient.
Can I respond to that? I guess it depends on how you were raised and where you came from. Because when my grandma cooked, she said if it wasn't made with love, it means nothing. So my grandma said, "How do you make this food?" And it was with love. We disagree culturally. That's fine. Where I come from is I help pass cannabis laws, right, on my reservation. Why did I do this? I help pass small business laws because it's the small people who are not getting access. It costs $60,000 to get a license here in Florida. That's a joke, guys. I'm sorry. It Let's go. All the BIPOC people don't have access to 60K. Tell me who has 60K sitting in a bank account that's a BIPOC right now. We are marginalized.
I think the last one sold for 55 million, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
they're in the millions now.
This is ridiculous. And you guys, what people don't understand, that the plant is real. In our culture, we say matakiwase, which means all our relatives. And what I know of peyote in and of itself is a medicine that I won't even touch because of my elders teaching me not to. Because I used to go to sun dances. As a little girl, I watched my relatives sacrifice, doing things ceremonial for this plant to get visions, because I'm telling you, it does help us heal. It does. I'm not saying that it doesn't, and we should have access to it. What I'm trying to emphasize is who has access to it, though, at this point. Is it the small business people? Is it the indigenous people? Because this corporations, they're taking all of the money. So when I passed the regulations for our tribe, my only goal was give the power back to the people, because it's the people who deserve to make the profits off of this. We don't deserve to sit in jail while there's people out there making millions of dollars.
Yep. Facts.
And another way I would have put the love is intention. So it's the intention that you put into it. So that's maybe more, but everybody has an opinion and it's welcome. So I appreciate your thought. I think you had a question and it might be the last one we can take.
My question is, there's certain eons of traditional experience, and there's prospect of science in the bridge back to that tradition, but in a way that is protective of consumers, whether it's recreational or it's medicinal. I was curious from the thoughts of the panel whether this vilification of corporations embraces the science that some of the corporations are oriented to.
For me, it's not the corporations, it's the intention behind what they do when they prioritize profits over people. I've been at meetings where people have made decisions to price things based off of the market, not off of the cost. And that's when we're talking about access. A lot of it is to do with cost. And so I think that for me, it's the intention behind the corporation. A corporation is a person. Every decision that they make is a personal decision made by people and should be backed up. So if they can make those decisions with intention, then they can stand behind those decisions.
Somebody else had a question?
I just want to quickly answer that question too.
Sure, 30 seconds.
Okay. So when you say that when someone says that science is a way back to traditional medicines, I would just hope that you account for a couple things. One is that when you talk about science as a scientific method, as in a system of inquiry, that is not new, nor is it owned by modern society. The people who developed ayahuasca did so using science. The people who developed rape did so using science. The people who developed the floating gardens in the Aztec Empire did so using science. Science is not a new product. It's a recent development in the dominant European culture and the dominant European colonial culture. And if we are going to move forward as a community on the global scale, we first have to acknowledge the reality that other people and other cultures that are not European colonial in their development are just as intelligent, and these traditional modalities aren't just superstition. This is science. This is knowledge. And when we talk, we're not talking as people who don't know anything and who need to be educated. We're talking as people who know a lot more that you don't know, and we're trying to educate you.
Thank you.
What's that?
And I think we have to wrap it up. I'm so sorry, but we're gonna stick around if you want to ask any of us any questions. I really want to say thank you to everyone for coming, and I hope that you enjoyed hearing from everyone here. If you want to keep up with our work, just a quick 5 seconds. How can we support you? Instagram? Can you tell us what?
Just be mindful. What you can do is be educate yourself on the local community as far as Indigenous people, and be mindful that there are other people who know about the medicines, and it's not about the money for us. It's never about the money for us.
So where can we support your work, Jenny?
Instagram, Facebook. I have a website.
What's your website?
JennyBigCrow.com.
JennyBigCrow.com, guys.
Thank you, guys. Instagram, Jenny Bigcrow.
Can you spell that?
JENNY, B as in boy, IGCROW. That is my real last name.
Yes, I believe you. Alex, how can we support you and your work?
Decriminalize Nature Florida, Decrim Nature Florida on Instagram. Decriminalizenatureflorida.com is our
.org.
website. .org is our website. We're still trying to get on our 501c4, but we're a nonprofit, and we are a statewide campaign that is about educating people on plant medicines and moving forward. We want to make sure that as Florida does move forward on plant medicine decriminalization, that we do so in a way that is guided by people who've been working with these medicines. So if you're on board with that, get on board with us, and let's make it happen.
Thank you, Alex. Nick, how can we best support you and your work?
My work can be best supported through Instagram. You can find me at Red Flower Forager and Red Flower Fungi. And if you'd like to send me an email, it's redflowerforager@gmail.com.
Thank you, Nick. Nina, how can we best support you and your work?
For me and for us is be careful with who you're sitting with. That is very, very important for me.
One more time for those in the back.
Just check it out very well who you're sitting with. You need to check backgrounds. You need to know where that medicine that person is giving it to you. Really do research, because unfortunately, it's a lot of there that they don't know what they're doing, and they're hurting people. For us, again, for me, it's like a united, sign petitions. Let's make this happen, and take care of yourself in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Lucas, how can we best support you and Panacea?
I would say for Panacea, go visit our website, check out our advisory board. You'll probably know some of the other faces on there. PanaceaPlantSciences.net. We're not the .com. So .net. You can also find me on Instagram, the Lucas. I also do cannabis education, liquid gold consulting. Those are also on there as well. You can find me there as well.
Awesome, beautiful. Thank you. And if you guys would like, we're all going to be downstairs. So come check us out at our booth. And yeah, thank you again for coming. Have a great day. Good job, everyone.
Thank you all.
Good job,
Thank
Valerie.
you, guys.
You're excellent.
Doksha.
Yeah, that would be awesome if we could. Okay, I'm going to give you. If you don't mind. Yeah. He's striking a couple chairs. Good job. Okay, let's start.
Test, test. There we go. Test, test.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, let's give him the two handouts. What? Did he get this? The guy in the orange jacket over there, and the guy that's with him. Yep.
There you go.
All right.
There you go. You got it.
Hello.
So in lieu of the lava leads. All right. So you're gonna want to put this on somewhere. When we get ready to go, hold that button in until you see a light turn on. Okay. Where the girls go? Go ahead. All right. You know what to do with everything? Okay, there's going to be an on button. Up. And it's coming on. Okay, perfect. And then, yeah, just make sure it's on video mode, not still shot mode. There should be a little camera icon. Yeah, you're on still shot mode because it's got the little camera. Video mode. Boom. Just that simple. Then just hit record.
I do a lot of consulting work on helping people set up their churches and other religious organizations. You know, in a way to receive the maximum protection under the religious life.
And you must be Gary.
I am.
Hi, Gary. My name's Albie.
Good to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, Albie.
I'm a lawyer also.
Okay.
Intrigued by the whole area. And boy, we got, quite a few individuals here.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I am about to publish my second book on the topic, which is a deep dive into the definition of religion under the First Amendment in light of the entheogenic experience and what we're starting to learn about the historical antecedents to these types of religious
Fascinating
activities.
intersection. No
Yeah.
question about it. That's not my area, but it's quickly becoming something
Yeah,
I'm
so
interested in.
I do primarily maritime litigation. My day job
Oh,
is
sorry.
Jones Act litigation, and this is kind of what I do at night for a hobby.
fun, yeah.
Yeah.
I was an antitrust lawyer
Okay.
ages ago, but I've been an entrepreneur and a lawyer for the last 40 or 50 years. Yeah. Always fun to listen to lawyers.
I came into this via construction law, so.
They're right?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But it was a nice natural transition because I've got 12 years of cannabis practice under my belt, and it's administrative law, so it fit in perfectly with my existing skill
That's
set.
what I do. I'm a regulatory lawyer.
Yeah.
I mean, I was the founder of the Interactive Gaming Council, and the casinos were going online.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just say,
Good. Starting? Yes? No?
We're good.
We're good?
We're good.
By the way, I hate using hand mics. Can everybody hear me okay without a hand mic? Do you want me to use the hand mic? All right, I'll use the hand mic.
Better? Okay. I will do things I don't normally do. So, hi everybody, I'm Gary, and this is Greg. And I want to welcome you to Mushrooms and God, a culinary class on how to cook psychedelics. If you'll all please reach under your seats. No, I'm totally kidding. For folks sitting on the periphery, we had to set up a little awkwardly. So we are going to have some slides going. You don't necessarily have to see them, but if you want to and you think moving might be better, this would be the moment. No? Okay, good. All right, fantastic. Now let's see if I can get the clicker working. If so, we're going to get going. By the way, Greg and I talked before we got started. We're absolutely open to audience questions, but we're going to wait till about the halfway point before taking questions. So save them up, hold on to them, give us about 30 minutes, and I'm going to start a timer here to keep us on track. Oops. So we got a countdown to keep going. Okay, perfect. All right, so just by way of quick introduction, see if this works. A little bit about me. I'm a 30-year veteran litigation attorney based out of Phoenix. The last, 12 years or so, I've been doing a pretty intensive cannabis practice in Arizona. And along the way, I encountered and ended up diving headfirst into psychedelics. I am now, amongst other things, general counsel to the nation's oldest multiracial peyote church. And also I have a podcast and a book by the same name, Psychedelics.
My name is Greg Lake. I'm a trial and appellate attorney based out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, licensed in both Texas and Louisiana. My foray into this space started in June 2020. I published my first book entitled Psychedelics and Mental Health Series, Psilocybin, which was, obviously a deep dive into the research, the mental health research that we, through February 2020, at that time. Shortly thereafter, I was asked by a gentleman local in Louisiana to help consult on his church, psychedelic church project. And so through that, I kind of dug in to do the research and started to actually write on the subject, which led to me publishing my second book, which is The Law of Entheogenic Churches in the United States, which now has led to soon to be published my third book, which is going to be The Law of Entheogenic Churches in the United States, Volume 2, The Definition of Religion under the First Amendment, which is really what we'll cover in depth here today.
Yeah, and I apologies, I don't have the cover for Greg's forthcoming book, but these are the books that we've authored. Mine is Psychedelics. The next one there, Entheogenic Churches, is Greg's. And then just this week, I published my latest book, Psychedelic Arizona.
It's a good book.
It's a psychedelic tour guide to Arizona. For real. I'm hoping to get it like in souvenir stores. It's chock full of information and color photos, and it's a lot of fun. Okay. Anyway, in order to have any conversation today with you all about the nexus between religion, psychedelics, we need to necessarily talk about the law and the current status of the law. And the starting point for any conversation on this is, of course, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. And it's, of course, up on the screen. And the big two things you need to know about the First Amendment are that it protects against establishment of religion and also protects the free exercise of religion. So it means no national religion, like we don't have the Church of the United States. Like you'll see the Church of England. There's no such thing here. You don't go to a government agent to get approval for your religion. You don't get a card that says, oh, now you're a Catholic or something like that. And also, although there's free exercise of religion, that is oftentimes misinterpreted to mean you can literally do anything you want in the name of religion, and that's simply not true. For example, if you wanted, you could form a cannibal religion, and you could worship cannibalism, and you could have all sorts of prayers to cannibals' sensibilities and have a cannibal god and a cannibal liturgy, and all of that's fine. You wouldn't be violating any laws or rules. You'd be totally okay under the law, until you take that final audacious step of actually trying to eat another human being. At that point, I think we can all respect the law is probably going to step in and say, whoa, there are some limits to religious freedom. So that's part of our starting point today. Greg, you want to take controlled substances?
Yeah. So here we have the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. Not the first act of its kind necessarily. There were other narcotics acts and drug laws prior to this, but obviously very sweeping legislation as it relates to substances and prohibition. And this is still the same scheme that we deal with even today. And so for our purposes here, the Controlled Substances Act is what we would call a general law, meaning that it is generally applicable across the board to everyone operating or living inside the United States. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and this is where your religious freedom and your right to engage in a psychedelic practice in your religion bang into each other. And I describe this like two big continents sort of smacking into each other, and when they touch, you have little earthquakes, and we call those court cases. Sometimes we also call them criminal convictions, unfortunately. But that's what you're having to deal with, and that's what we're talking about today. So let's press on. Okay, introductory thoughts. Greg, take it away.
Yeah, so the definition of religion under the First Amendment, its impact upon the consumption of entheogens and religious practices. So obviously, someone consuming entheogens, psychedelics in a recreational manner wouldn't fit under definition of a religious practice. So, where we draw the line on what kind of practices and beliefs as it relates to these substances rise to the level of being a religious exercise under the First Amendment is obviously where our talk is going to be heavily based today. Religious use of entheogen dates to prehistory, a practice that has never ceased. Yeah, so there's a anthropologist from Arizona State University. His name is Michael Winkelman, and in 2019 he published an article that basically relates that there is a lot of new archaeological and anthropological evidence to show that, at least as it relates to the sacred consumption of mushrooms, was a worldwide practice in the ancient world. It's been found to have occurred in almost all major areas of the world, to the point that Mr. Winkelman, basically relates that, again, at least as it relates to the consumption of sacred mushrooms and possibly other entheogens, that it's actually our shared world religious heritage, and very well might have been the origin of religious thought in man.
Yeah, if I can add an extra slice of cheese on top of that sandwich. Just to emphasize, there's never been a broken chain in the world in the concept of using some form of psychoactive substance in a religious context. It may not be mainstream in the United States necessarily, but we're just one country with a small population compared to a much larger planet with a much larger and more diverse population. Has anybody by chance happened to have read Brian Murarescu's book, The Immortality Key? That got published a year ago, and it's exactly on point. And Brian did a fantastic job of pulling things like records from the Vatican to show that even early Christianity and pre-Christianity embraced these substances.
Yeah, and wanted to relate real quick on what Gary was saying, is that when we look back over history and we look at the consumption of these types of substances, particularly natural earth-based entheogens, the religious, ritualistic, shamanic use has been the norm. Really, the thought of recreational use never entered into the public eye or sentiment until the 60s. And before then, really, it was the research. Then it started into the research. So the religious use bled into the research, then this concept of recreational use. But again, this is a very, very small sliver in minority when we look back over time of what the traditional and predominant uses of these substances have been.
Yeah, and if any of you are looking for careers and have a penchant for anthropology, there is so much opportunity for you. There's tons of historical record that have not been looked at yet, even for the purpose of determining psychedelic presence. For example, a couple of years ago, an archaeological journal out of Israel called Tel Aviv published an article talking about how some scientists had taken some scrapings off of a 2,000-year-old altar in a temple, and they found cannabis residue on that altar. Shocking, but not really, right?
And then, I'll go ahead and mention this last little slide here. The religious use of entheogens is growing rapidly in the United States, although yet unquantified research projects seek to census psychedelic religions. I can say, as far as my practice in consulting and helping groups, across the United States on this question of, do our practices and beliefs rise to the level of religious? To date, in the last probably 18 months, I've worked with almost 30 such groups, and they keep coming almost on a daily basis. So it is rapidly growing in the United States. Where that's going to lead in the next 3 to 5 years, I don't know exactly, but I imagine that it would be pretty interesting to sit back and watch all of this unfold.
Yeah, and I absolutely parrot that as well. There are not a lot of lawyers in the country who do this kind of work. There are a lot of reasons for it. But I can tell you, since I kind of, air quotes, came out of the closet, so to speak, I get hit up all the time with these questions, and it's definitely on an upswing. The curiosity's out there, the desire's out there, and the lack of knowledge, unfortunately, is also out there. So this is in part why Greg and I do this today, and we'll continue to do this. All right, so the last little piece of the puzzle. You want to talk about RFRA, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So remember, we had First Amendment, then we had the Controlled Substances Act, and now the last piece of this religion puzzle is another body of federal statute called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And it was created in 1993 as a reaction to a very unusual and unexpected psychedelic religion ruling out of the Supreme Court. And that case is Oregon versus Smith. And the essential ruling in the case was a couple of Native Americans had wanted to engage in peyote ritual based on their Native American church practice. And they were denied government benefits because of the conflict. And they had sued to have their religious freedoms observed, and unfortunately they lost. And they unexpectedly lost on top of that, because what came out of their case was a ruling that wiped out what had been up until that point the standard the Supreme Court used when evaluating religion cases. Nobody really exactly knows why the Supreme Court did that, particularly when it was Justice Scalia, who, if anybody knows who he is, was, up until his death, considered to be the most conservative justice on the court, and yet he took this very strange anti-religion perspective in the ruling, and it did harm. But so much so that within a few years of the ruling in that case, multiple groups got together, and groups you would have never in a million years have thought would have gotten together, and supported the creation and passage of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which now restores the standard of review. I think the next slide has that. It does. Okay. You want to take it from there?
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to, reiterate about, Religious Freedom Restoration Act is that it was enacted in response to a plant medicine religion case. So, even the whole foundation of this statute and kind of what it was, passed in response to relates to our topic of discussion today. But now we have the actual substance of the statute here. It says government shall not substantially burden a person's exercise of religion, even if the burden results from a rule of general applicability. So back to the Controlled Substances Act, like I said when we covered it, it's a rule of general applicability. The Controlled Substances Act, applies to everyone across the board equally. And then here the exception. The government may substantially burden a person's exercise of religion only if it demonstrates that the application of the burden to the person. And one thing I want to reiterate here is the burden to the person. So these cases are decided on literally a case-by-case basis. Is in furtherance of a compelling governmental interest and is the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling governmental interest. And I think we'll probably cover this on some coming slides.
Yeah.
Exactly what the compelling governmental interest is when we talk about plant medicines and religion. And then a person whose religion exercise has been burdened in violation of this section may assert that violation as a claim or defense in a judicial proceeding and obtain appropriate relief against the government. So, on top of what we'll see, obtaining injunctions against the government to be able to practice your religion, we have this recent case, Tanzan versus Tanvir, that basically allows citizens to personally sue government agents for monetary damages for substantially burdening their religion. And we'll cover this. So that kind of changes the calculus here when we talk about what are government agents going to do in order to burden someone's religion, because obviously they're going to need to consider the fact that any kind of monetary damages that might be suffered through that process could potentially come out of their own pockets.
Yeah, another interesting thing about the Tanzan case is that you'll notice it occurred in 2020, just a couple of years ago. So for almost 40 years, there was kind of this mistaken misunderstanding that you couldn't pursue a damage claim if somebody from the government discriminated against your religious practice. And it turns out it's in the statute the whole time. Just short story there. Tanzan versus Tanvir, the case involved a couple of Islamic gentlemen who were approached by the FBI, and the FBI wanted them to turn an informant on some of their friends and an Islamic group they were involved with, and the gentleman declined. So shockingly, they ended up finding themselves on no-fly lists and having all sorts of trouble for no reason other than they just wouldn't assist the FBI as their informants. So they sued on religious discrimination and won, which is fantastic. Other things to know as well. Greg mentioned that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act applies in a way that if you've got a law of general applicability, that's an acceptable statute. So just to make sure you're clear on that, you clearly cannot have under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA, is a specific statute that's aimed at a religion or a religious practice. You could never have that. So I'll just use the really silly example. You couldn't outlaw Catholicism. That would get struck down immediately under this statute. But when you have a law that says generally everybody is supposed to do or not do a thing, so I'll use my cannibalism example again. Again, you can have your cannibal religion, but when you actually try to go eat a person, yeah, the government would step in. And it's that compelling governmental interest. Does the government have a compelling interest in people not eating other people? I personally would vote yes on that. I would hope most of you would as well. I don't know many religions that support homicide or cannibalism, but that's okay. But that's what we're talking about. If the law has general applicability, it's an okay law. But if it discriminates against your religious practice, that's when you jump down to the next step, which is, okay, is the government trying to achieve that goal by the least restrictive means? So again, my cannibalism example. I don't know any other way of prohibiting people from eating other people other than by prohibiting people from eating other people. So if you could find a way to soften that, you might have an argument in court. I don't know, but that's just making sure you're clear on that. Ready for the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. All right. So now we're getting into probably the premier Supreme Court case. Remember that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this it's a long name. It's O Centro Espirita I'm going to butcher this. Beneficiente versus Ashcroft, also known as UDV. This is an ayahuasca case, and I'm also going to butcher this pronunciation. Junio de Vegetal. Does anybody speak? Did I get that right? Thank you. I don't profess to speak Portuguese. So anyway, the UDV case principally regarded the UDV church's problems being able to import and take possession of and ultimately distribute their ayahuasca to their congregants. Anyway, Greg, do you want to talk about the UDV itself?
Yeah, that's fine. So again, the UDV in like this first slide says it's a Christian syncretic religion, which also mixes elements of South American shamanism, particularly related to the consumption of ayahuasca. And so this will kind of be germane to our discussion today. And I would like to note at this point that the government didn't. Oh, and one other thing is that this religion, the UDV, is actually recognized by the Brazilian government, and I believe worked in tandem with the Catholic Church on a lot of humanitarian issues down in Brazil. But what it means, in this context, and what's important for our conversation today is the fact that the government didn't controvert whether the UDV, whether those practices and beliefs constitute a religion.
Yeah, and also the term syncretic might not be familiar to all of you. And it's an important thing, particularly in psychedelic religions, because you'll notice UDV engages in ayahuasca, but they also identify as Christian. So syncretic just means that you're a religion that perhaps borrows from different religious groups, and you aggregate them and you form effectively a new religion from the pieces of others. And this is way more common in religion than people ever realize or think about.
Yeah, so right here, it kind of talks a little bit about, it says UDV uses ayahuasca as a link to divinities, a holy communion, and a cure for physical and psychological ailments. And once we get into kind of the definition of religion, you'll see that, this link to the divine is very important. And also, too, we will discuss, a cure for physical and psychological ailments. As many people are aware, the medicinal qualities of these plant medicines, these entheogens, is being noted in the research for the last 60, 70 years. So does that qualify as religious belief? So if I have a religion and I believe that these medicines also help cure physical and psychological ailments, does that disqualify my other religious beliefs, relating to it connects me to the divine? So we'll get into that a little bit later, but just know that there's a distinction to be drawn there. Yeah, anything else you think?
Yeah, I think we've got this slide covered. Okay. So there's another one.
There we go. Yeah, so right here, custom service. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the actual story of UDV on this slide. I suspect people in the back can't even see it, but yeah, basically in the late 90s, UDV was having trouble, like I said, being able to import their ayahuasca. it's manufactured in Brazil. It's not made here. It's grown from plants and then, combined into a drinkable potent tea. And for years, UDV had been importing it, and for years, the DEA kept interdicting, as did customs. And by the way, I know that when I talk to groups, sometimes people are really dour on the DEA, and I want to say the DEA has a role to play in all of this. And for those of you who might hate the DEA, look, they're part of the reality. So you have to learn how to live with them, and you have to learn how to deal with them. And that's exactly what this case was about. It was about getting a court order to change DEA behaviors. So besides recommending to some of you that if you have a penchant for anthropology or archaeology, that you pursue that, I would also say if you want to lever change and you perhaps have a fascination with law enforcement, and I'm quite serious about this, go get a job at the DEA. If you want to change that agency and you want to change their policies, go work there and do it from within. It'll be a much faster process to make change than waiting for these unicorn cases to show up and hope that they have all the right facts and all the right support, because these don't happen often. Anyway, the bottom line for UDV was the Supreme Court affirmed UDV's right to engage in ayahuasca because UDV had demonstrated to the court's satisfaction that the ayahuasca was an integral, inseparable part of their religion, not just something they did incidentally, that if you took the ayahuasca out of the equation, you would no longer have the religion. And that's going to be a key part of where we're going to end up going for the remainder of this seminar.
And one thing I wanted to point out is that, like you said, Chief Justice John Roberts authored the opinion for the United States Supreme Court, who obviously is still the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice. And so, as we're looking forward, over the next 5-10 years in these cases, it's important to remember that, theoretically he should still be there and Chief Justice. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'll also make this comment. I don't know where people fall on the political spectrum. I'm going to guess liberal because we're at a psychedelics conference. But if anybody was aggrieved at what happened with the Supreme Court appointments over the last administration, if there is a shiny spot in that or a silver lining, and I don't know if there is, but if there is, we have got a Supreme Court right now that's very pro-religion, which is good for psychedelic religions. So if there are some good cases that come up over the next few years that ultimately make their way up to the Supreme Court, I'm optimistic that they will get a favorable ear from this court. So again, if there's any silver lining, that would probably be it. All right.
Yeah, so Church of the Holy Light of the Queen versus McCasey. This is a United States District Court opinion out of Oregon. And just so you know, we called this church right here is actually what we call the Santo Daime religion, which again is another Christian syncretic religion from Brazil, almost just like the UDV. And in 2009, well, they sued before then, but in 2009 they have a favorable opinion from the District Court in Oregon, allowing them as well to practice their religion and enforcing an injunction against the DEA to play nice and to help them import their sacrament as well.
Yeah, couple interesting comments about Church of the Holy Light. You'll notice it's out of Oregon. Remember a little earlier I said it's the Oregon case, Oregon versus Smith, where the people lost their psychedelic argument. Yeah, same state many years later, although this is a federal court, not a state court. But you had a somewhat favorable ruling out of that jurisdiction, even though there was earlier precedent that suggested otherwise. The other thing too, for the non-lawyers in the room, which I'm going to guess is probably almost everybody, this is not a Supreme Court case. This is a lower court case out of the Oregon district, federal district, which means that it's binding in that district, but not necessarily nationally. What anybody ever wants out of a court case or appellate precedent is ultimately a Supreme Court ruling, because when the Supreme Court enters a ruling, that sets the national standard for what that law is. Right now, these psychedelic cases are rare, and Church of the Holy Light is just amongst a small handful from one circuit. Other circuits don't have to follow it, so you could have the exact same case tried elsewhere in the country and quite literally come up with an opposite result. And the way these are ultimately resolved is a Supreme Court appeal that settles the issue.
And one thing I'd like to mention real quick about this case is, just like the UDV matter, whether the Santo Daime was a religion or not was not controverted by the government. However, what was controverted was the sincerity of Jonathan Goldman, the leader, and particularly also the group. And the reason why that was is because prior to this, I think in 1999, the government kicked in Jonathan Goldman's door and seized, I think, almost 50 liters of ayahuasca. Well, instead of shutting it down, Goldman decided to not be as upfront or out in the open about his practice, but did indeed keep practicing the Santo Daime religion despite being the government interference. And when it went to trial, the government told the court, he said, look, he's not, after we kicked their door in, they weren't being as open or above board about their practice, and that shows a problem with their sincerity. The judge disagreed and said, no, the fact that these people continued to practice regardless of whether it was in the open or not after you kicked their leader's door in actually proves their sincerity.
And therein is the crux of the problem, defining religion. Courts have a very difficult time doing that. Again, there's a smattering of psychedelic cases. They're not all at the Supreme Court level. There's only one or two. And the rest are either state court level or lower trial courts at the federal jurisdiction. And again, depending on where you are in the country, these things can turn up very different results on similar or same facts. For example, in the second box there, I reference Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Have all of you heard of the Flying Spaghetti Monster religion? Okay, so depending on the court you're in, and there are multiple cases around the country, some courts have said, yeah, that's a religion. Other courts have said, no, it's actually just a parody, and therefore doesn't qualify as a religion, and therefore doesn't get the religious benefits. And the case I'm thinking of in particular, a federal inmate had sued for religious practice rights, claiming to be part of this Flying Spaghetti Monster religion, and he lost handily. So I guess ordinary meals for him. Anyway, peppered in, do you want to talk about Melanek or Africa, or should we just gloss that?
No, I'll just briefly mention, United States Seeger, where were a series of conscientious objector cases where the Supreme Court signaled that basically they were going to move beyond just this traditional monotheistic, my relation to the creator definition of religion, which then led to Malnak v. Yogi in Africa, is where particularly the Third Circuit started to conceptualize some factors for courts to use to test these types of things. And at the end of the day, I want to tell you that it's mostly religion by analogy. That even the objective factors that they've come up with really is just testing the purported religion versus what we know about traditional religions. So, but we'll get into those particular factors here in just a second.
Yep. And by the way, Greg, I said we'd hit this at exactly the halfway part.
Yeah.
Nailed it. We're exactly 30 minutes.
Okay.
All right. So this is the halfway mark. We've got 3 slides left, but this is like kind of the meat of the presentation. So we're going to cover Myers, and then we're going to open the floor to questions, or we can just open the floor to questions while we're covering Myers.
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay, so from this point on, hit us if you want to hit us. Okay, so why don't you tell the story of Myers, and we'll dive in.
Yeah, so Myers is out of the district court in Wyoming. The defendant Myers was charged with marijuana trafficking. In defense, he raised religious defense, and allegedly said that, well, this is the Church of Marijuana. And, as this says here, is that he had no documents or any other external evidence to prove it up. And so he was basically put on the stand in front of the court and made to, elucidate his religion on the spot. And so kind of what came out of that was a very hodgepodge, poor attempt at defining a religion. But it did provide a very good background for the court to go through these different factors and analyze and talk about them, and is what provides me and Gary and other lawyers in the space guidance in helping other people kind of determine whether what their beliefs and practices are would rise to the level of religion.
Yeah, and the next two slides are going to have all the details from Myers, but I will just comment that what Myers really stands for is don't find religion while you're in handcuffs in the back of a squad car. That's just maybe a few minutes too late. Just saying, just saying. I mean, come to me, hire me, sure. I just don't know what we're going to do. Okay, so this is what Myers did. The court decided to enumerate the different type of indicia that courts should be looking for when being faced with the question of, do I have a religion or a religious group in front of me, for purposes then of determining whether or not they're entitled to the exemption. And the court listed off effectively 5 different criteria, but they're chunky criteria. So I guess we'll just bounce around these. So the first one, of course, is ultimate ideas. What is the idea of the religion? What is the ultimate belief? What is existence? What is your life? What are you? What is your purpose? Why are you here? These are the kinds of things that religions generally tend to contemplate, at least as far as the mainstream religions go. But not every religion necessarily does this.
Yeah, and so in kind of in the context here, we talk about ultimate ideas. I mean, a lot of us who've had very profound, deep, entheogenic experiences know that very often you come out of these experiences with a whole host of ultimate ideas about, our relation to the universe, our purpose here on earth. And so as we kind of talk about the use of entheogens in religion, it kind of goes hand in hand with some of these first 4 factors, for Myers.
Yeah, and by the way, Myers didn't create a bingo card for religion. You don't have to hit all of these necessarily to claim, religious bingo. These are just things the courts will look at to come to their decision. So the next one is metaphysical beliefs, which again can be a variety of things. Are there other planes of existence, other manifestations of existence? Does your group or religion think about such things? Do you think about such things? And again, not every religion does, but some do, and these are things the courts will look for.
And again, in our context, when the Myers court actually goes through each of these and discusses it in depth, when it talks about metaphysical beliefs in relation to consuming a scheduled substance part of a religion, it notes that traditional entheogenic religions believe that when they consume these substances, that they do enter some alternate mode, reality, dimension, temporality, where they usually encounter deities and other figures that provide guidance for, ultimate ideas and life questions, past, present, and future. So, generally, my impression is that if this is the type of belief structure of the purported entheogenic religion, that's getting very close, if not hitting the mark, to rising to the level of religion.
And then third is moral or ethical systems. Again, not every religion has these, but many do. Certainly the Abrahamic lineage is awash in moral systems. But you could look at other religious groups and not necessarily see that. And also notice that there's no standard in Myers as to what those morals or ethics ought to be. So I'll give kind of a tasteless example, but it's nonetheless a fair and honest, real example. Circumcision. Depending on where you live in the world, circumcision either is normal, acceptable practice or not. And also, depending on whether you're male or female, it's normal practice or not. Here in the U.S., clearly not. Other parts of the world, it's a practice that's engaged. So these are other issues that courts would look at and have to wrestle with.
Yeah, and in regards to moral or ethical system, kind of go back and real quick discuss the Malnat case, which was basically the science of creative intelligence, transcendental meditation, right? And this is a group that didn't want to be found to be a religion because they were teaching high school students this what was found to be a religion. So they were trying to opt out and say, we're not a religion. But the court found, and part of that was that it taught people to communicate with this underlying creative force in the universe, and that ultimately communing with this force was the road to ultimate happiness. In the court and Molnock noted that, here there isn't some type of long moral or ethical system, but that this underlying fundamental truth and way to happiness that's being taught in this course qualifies for this factor. So I just want to point that out, that it doesn't have to be some big long laundry list of truths. And one more thing I'll say is that, when we talk about the entheogenic experience, I don't know if any of y'all have ever experienced this, but many people, go to this place, what we call unitive consciousness, or cosmic unity, this place where everything is one. And so what I would posit is that, well, when we kind of extrapolate that out, if you've experienced that, well, then what does that tell you about the way you treat other people or other living beings, right? So even though these types of entheogenic experiences can impart a very fundamental yet extremely profound moral ethical system.
Yeah, and just to illustrate a example of that, you could look at, for example, the Satanic Temple. It's an acknowledged religious group. It observes the flip side of what Catholicism looks at, but they both have oddly the same goal, which is generally happiness and good life. Then number 4 is comprehensiveness of beliefs. And this, I kind of take this as a catch-all. It's kind of a little bit of everything and can embrace things like whether or not you have a belief system, whether it's written down or not, and it doesn't necessarily need to be. There are many religions that don't write stuff down. That's not abnormal at all.
Yeah, and kind of back to what I said about the moral ethical system is that this comprehensiveness doesn't mean, again, that it has to be this big laundry list written down of all these beliefs. You could have just a few beliefs that are so fundamental and pervasive throughout, existence and everyday life that it qualify and be comprehensive, just like the science of creative intelligence, transcendental meditation, and Molnack, same thing. They said it's just this one fundamental underlying truth that this religion seeks that qualifies under this factor and the moral or ethical system factor.
And then the final Myers factor, and you'll see it's got a lot of subparts, so this is stuff to talk about, is the accoutrements of religion, which again is kind of a catch-all. It can be a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ways that religions dress up and behave and act, and the tchotchkes they have and the icons they use, etc. And again, you don't have to necessarily have any of these or all of these, but these are elements that courts are going to look at when determining, hey, do I have a religion in front of me or not? Do I have an exemption to consider or not?
Yeah, and so kind of getting to the list in terms of entheogenic religions, when we talk about founder, prophet, or teacher, many of these religions actually consider the substances themselves to be the teachers of the religion. And what I found through my consulting with different groups is that a lot of them stay away from any one person being a founder or prophet, right? This kind of vertical structure tends to be avoided in place of, again, letting the sacrament itself kind of serve in that place.
Yeah. You're probably all familiar, like the Abrahamic lineages are all considered to be revelatory religions, meaning that the knowledge of them came to an individual through some divine revelation. So, whether it's Abraham or Jesus or any of the people in the Bible who have been listed as having received messages from God, Moses, Muhammad, if you're looking at the Quran. But not all religions have that single individual intermediary between whatever and themselves.
Yeah, and just real quick to tag onto that point is that, with the entheogenic experience, you're actually, for most of the people I've worked with, the thought is we're actually tapping ourselves into the divine, therefore cutting out any intermediary that need to, interpret, what I'm getting from the divine. And one thing I want to say is that, we're all familiar with the practice these days of integration. So integration providers, what they do is basically help us make sense, in terms of religion, help us make sense of our primary religious mystical experience, right? So when we think about an analog like a Christian pastor, well, what are they doing? Well, in many respects, they're taking the story of a 2,000-year-old primary religious mystical experience and helping us try to make sense of that to our life today. Whereas in these entheogenic religions, what these integration providers are doing are basically helping us make sense of our direct, primary religious mystical experience. So that's just an analog that I like to draw. Again, because it's religion by analogy in a lot of ways. So I think that's a pretty, important point to make when we discuss these types of religions.
Yeah. And by the way, don't some of the revelations read like trip journals? Don't you think?
They do. And real quick, I'll say this. I've seen a comparison where they basically put up these ancient primary religious mystical experiences against, experiences people have had today under the influence of entheogens, and in many respects they're indistinguishable.
We had a hand up in the back. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And here's what I'll say about it is that these are experiential religions, right? Before I sit in an ayahuasca ceremony and I've never had this type of experience, I don't really know what's in store for me, right? And so most of the beliefs and practices emanate from actually experiencing it, right? So yeah, I mean, the thing is that we want, you can't say that someone coming to every ceremony is sincere necessarily because they don't really know, they haven't experienced exactly what it is that is the religion, right? So, but the thought is that, a good number of people, once they experience it, will then come to understand the religious and spiritual nature of the experience. Not all will. So I hope that kind of answers, where you're going with that.
Yeah, and also on top of that, it's not uncommon at all for people to have just a singular psychedelic experience, and that's it, they're done. They got what they needed, and they had that revelation or that epiphany, and it's all they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's a very good question. So I don't know if many of y'all are familiar with Soul Quest, which is an ayahuasca church based out of Orlando, who is currently in litigation with the DEA. And through the litigation, the DEA basically wrote their position letter or paper, on whether Soul Quest qualifies for an exemption. And part of it was that Soul Quest claimed that this ayahuasca manifesto, which I think is written by an anonymous person, is their religious or holy text. And so, there's lots of arguments by DEA that, well, not everyone there knew about it, even though the leader claimed it was the text. But again, when we think about these Myers factors, like Gary said several times, is that none of these are dispositive in and of themselves. Now, might having a holy text be a good indicator of a religion? Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of judges would put a lot of stock in that, right? But again, when we look at the Myers court makes it very clear before it goes into these that none of them are dispositive in and of themselves. And as a matter of fact, there might be a purported religion that hits none of these and could still be found to be a religion.
Yeah, absolutely true. But speaking as a person who goes into court and litigates, I will tell you, I would feel much better if I had a client who did hit psychedelic bingo and did have all of these checked off on their card, because it makes me selling this notion to the court much easier. But you don't have to have these necessarily.
You got a question in the back? Mm-hmm. That's a very
the DEA registration question. I was waiting for that one.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's my answer to register with DEA. No.
Yeah,
no. But not because, well, I'll put it this way. The DEA is not really equipped to evaluate religion, and yet they claim to have that ability, and also they claim that that's their right. I'm not aware that the DEA has any religion certificate holding people on their staff. I'm not aware that they train any of their field agents in religious studies. So they're like literally the worst group to be evaluating this, and it's effectively asking the police to grade your religion. Yeah. So my stock response when people ask, should I put in for the DEA exemption? No. And your other reason is, in all the years that the DEA has asked for these exemption requests to be submitted in writing, they've never granted one, not one.
And so where does that kind of leave us? Well, I'll say this is that, you know, our religious rights exist. We don't have to petition the government for our religious rights. They already exist, right? So, you know, the best that we can do, absent actually suing the DEA and the federal government for an exemption, is to use these Meyer factors and use these other cases that we know of to help structure both the beliefs and the practices of the religion to give them the best chance of being found to be such in court. And then also, too, you know, we have this thing called sincerity. Well, really, just by, you know, being open and practicing your religion, and moreover, if you have a lot of this documentation and things done, helps to show that you're actually sincere in your religious practice. So, you know, that's kind of the calculus that we use to help advise people the best we can, because not everyone has $100,000 to go and sue the federal government in court in order to get the okay, quote unquote, to practice their religion. But again, you don't have to have that in order to actually practice your religion. Those rights exist as is.
I'm sorry, I have to correct one thing. Go ahead. It will cost way more than $100,000 to sue the federal government for this. I'm not kidding, guys. These cases are hellaciously expensive. That's why I'm saying, if you really want to lever change, go into politics, run for office, go get jobs in these agencies, go work for the DEA. That is your fastest path to lever change. Waiting for these cases, forget it. It's an omnipresent risk, unfortunately. This is the status of the law today. This is exactly why we're up here talking to y'all, is that it's not a safe practice, but if you're doing it correctly, it's a survivable practice, meaning if you ever got hauled into court, if you're able to prove up this stuff, there's a better chance you'll survive it than not. So my other stock advice to psychedelic religious groups, besides getting your doctrines in place, etc., also immediately start saving for your defense budget. And I'm not kidding about that.
No,
I'm really not.
Great advice. Yes, sir.
So I wrap my head around this as someone who has deep background and a little bit of global perspective. First, on the global sphere, we in the United States are probably unaware of what's going on in other countries with regard to this issue. We touch on that. Secondly, is there any kind of preemption at the federal level? You could, for example, be making your Myers case only to find that the local sheriff has it in you. And then finally, with regard to the question of, you know, if you are one of these churches that looks legitimate to relying on these substances as part of the ritual, what's the word to the wise person who wants to pursue it in terms of threading through the local, state, federal, and global significance?
I'll deal on the preemption, because I think the preemption kind of delved into that last part as well. So, you know, the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, the federal act was held, I think it was in 1997, City of Bernie versus Flores, found not to be applicable to the states. Now, in response to that, I want to say to date, 21 states have enacted their own RFRA legislation, some of which tracks exactly the federal law, some is a little bit different. And then also what we found is that there are state constitutions that already provided just as much, if not more, protection for religious exercise than the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, hence why some states didn't enact a RFRA statute. And then again, there's also a handful of states where it's kind of in the air, you know, what kind of protections would be provided. So it's not exactly known, but that's a great question. And yeah, so, and also what I've found through my practice is that different localities and municipalities also have a different attitude towards these things. And I think somewhat, but maybe not so counterintuitively, from what I've seen, some of the more conservative states and counties and districts actually have a more hands-off attitude towards these things than some of the other more liberal ones. Surprisingly or not, but again, we're all very much aware that conservatives are very protective of religion, even though they might not necessarily agree with the practices here. For many, that does not override their wanting to provide protections. And then global, do you have a perspective on the global?
Somewhat. Just to flesh that out a little bit, there are multiple layers of jurisdiction that cover all of this. So there's the federal, of course, and you've got at the top the Constitution, but then also federal statutes. Wholly separate from everything that the federal government and federal courts can do, you've got your state constitution, your state statutes, your state courts. And your state could choose to charge you where maybe the federal government would choose not to charge you. Or flip that over, the feds might choose to charge you and the state might not choose to charge you. So you've got to realize that you're having to satisfy multiple jurisdictions at the same time. And then on top of all of that, if that weren't confusing enough, the United States is signatory to 3 major drug treaties. And this includes the Psychotropic Treaty, I think of 1971, if my memory's good on that. So you've also got to understand that when like the DEA and the US Department of Justice act really slowly or sort of weird or perverse on these issues, they often lean back and point to these treaties and say, well, look, hey, the US is signatory to these treaties, so we have to regulate these drugs this particular way. But candidly, they get lazy about it because they don't then take the next step, because the next step is clearly to do some level of religious analysis, because these treaties specifically permit for this. They expressly allow for religious practice. So, for example, you'll see the ayahuasca religious groups coming up out of Brazil. Brazil's okay with this. Brazil's also a signatory, I think, to these treaties as well, yet they take a very different perspective. So if you go down to Brazil, you'll have a very open, unhesitating experience engaging with these ayahuasca groups. Not so much here in the U.S.
And I think they were asking us to go
Yep.
ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me just make one more comment real quick on these factors. I'll make this real quick. Ceremonies or rituals. And rituals, obviously, we're aware that for entheogenic religions, this is really the crux of the religious practice. And in my new book, I actually discuss the Myers test at length and actually propose a somewhat different weighted test with a lot of emphasis placed on ceremonies and rituals for a number of reasons. One, I think having a detailed and thorough ceremony or ritual shows sincerity in the practice, right? Because we're taking a lot of time for preparation, step by step. And then 2, I think it also goes to the religious aspect of these practices. And I say that because a lot of the rituals and ceremonies, there's a lot of metaphysical beliefs attached to those, right? As to why we do this at this time, X, Y, and Z. So people I've always consulted with, I always tell them to take a lot of time to outline and discuss the ceremonies and rituals, and more importantly, the beliefs behind those particular practices.
Are we good to keep going, or are we
wrap it
we're,
up?
we're,
Yeah.
okay? We're getting the signal. So I guess we're going to leave it there. Anyway, we hope you learned at least 1 or 2 things today. We'll linger around, so if folks have questions, we're happy to talk to you. But the important thing to take away from this is not really well-developed, well-settled law. There is First Amendment protection. There is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act out there to also additionally protect you. You just have to make sure you're going about this the right way. And again, I recommend if you're going to start up one of these religious groups or you're part of one, start saving a defense budget, because you never know when you're going to need it.
Thank y'all.
Thanks.
Sir? You know, I haven't as of yet, but I'm not. Yeah, but I haven't tried yet. Yeah. Okay. No, it's okay.
Well, actually, I'm not gonna ask you that question.
Hello, 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 hello. La la la.
Peace to the room.
Is it working? I don't know if it's working. Are you speaking louder than I am? La la la. La 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 la. I don't know if I
I don't have a lot of sound. Is oh, I can hear myself. I don't know.
That might not be working either. We could share a mic. Sharing it's
Lala. I could
it's a
also
little
share.
strong. Just gotta hold it like here. Just Should we get into it? Cool. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are here for a panel on science and research joined by 3 doctors. I'm the only not doctor here, so I'm going to be as little scientific as possible on my end. I want to invite the audience, if you have any questions during the panel, feel free to raise your hand. I'll try and get to you right away so we don't have a forgetting the questions scenario. Dr. Scott Fisher, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do in the space?
Hi everyone, my name is Scott Fisher. I am a psychiatrist and I've operated a private practice here in South Florida for about 8 years. I'm also certified in psychedelic therapy and research from the California Institute of Integral Studies, which has led to me becoming the facilitator for clinical trials. And there's a clinical trials center named Siegel Clinical Trials here in South Florida. Right now we only have one psychedelic trial assessing psilocybin, a single dose for the treatment of depression, but we have many more planning to come on board within the next 6 to 18 months. So it's a pleasure to be here to speak to you all.
And next to Dr. Scott, we have Dr. Julia Mirror. Julia, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about the work you do?
Sure. So some of you know that I joke that I'm a recovering physician. I got my medical degree, but when I realized I wasn't buying what I was selling, I resigned and I found myself exploring psychedelic assisted therapy, first by accident and then very intentionally. So the last 3.5 years, I've really committed myself to this space, learning everything I could about where we're at now, where do the experts think that we need to go, and how do we get there. So right now I'm involved in the 3 pillars that I think will move this space forward, which is first and foremost, the policy. We need to change the laws in order to be able to facilitate the second part, which is the research. So I'm involved with Scott here at Siegel Trials. And then the third part is the clinics, who's going to roll out what we're going to be, putting online. And there I'm a director of strategy for a ketamine clinic in New York. So that's me.
Perfect. And Dr. Denise Godot, if you want, taking us away on the 3rd introduction.
Peace to the room. How's everyone? Whenever it's so fast, it's fine. Hello. Peace to the room. Well, I am Puerto Rican, so hopefully you can hear my voice. I like to project. Hello. I am Dr. Denise Christina Vidal. I am a cannabis epidemiologist at the University of Miami School of Medicine with multiple appointments also at the School of Nursing and Health Studies and also Sylvester Cancer Research Center. At my laboratory, we focus on the brain, heart, and gut, and we focus on how cannabis, specifically multiple cannabinoids, and now psychedelics, how that can impact especially those 3 organs. I'm so excited to be here, and I'll talk more in the future, but in case I lose any of you, I am so excited that we're finally having this conversation. And ashe to that.
I love it. I was just going to say, I'm going to Puerto Rico on Wednesday, so I'm going to need some travel tips. Yeah, will do. I think I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning there. I'm Patrick. I'm the president of Microdose. We're a psychedelic media company doing events and intelligence for the space. So this first question is for Dr. Scott, and it comes from Julia, actually. So what do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of my role as a psychedelic facilitator in the trials, these trials are mostly geared towards something called psychedelic assisted therapy or psychotherapy. And so that entails, once, the participants in the trial complete the recruitment process and the screening process, which is quite lengthy and detailed, and pretty onerous actually on the participants in the trial. If they have met all those criteria, then, which depends on the trial, but there's kind of some consistent sort of things that they have, then they enter into the treatment phase of the trial. And that typically entails 3 different phases of treatment. One is a preparation process, where the primary objective is, Julia and I are co-facilitators. So for each participant, we are with them for almost the entire part of the treatment phase. So the preparation phase has a few objectives. The first one is certainly to just really get to know each other and get a comfort level in preparation for the dosing day, which is done only a few days usually after our final preparation session. We also get a chance to, and then that's really the bulk of the, really going into hours and hours in depth learning about the person and, the case of the trial we're working right now, their experience of depression, as much of their life experiences and family history that they're able to share with us. We have 8 hours of preparation time built into the current trial. So it's maybe could be nice to have longer, but in terms of, typical treatments, it's actually quite a lot of time to spend with someone in a relatively concentrated period. So that part is really nice, especially for me as a psychiatrist who's more used to 15 to 30-minute appointments, which is really woefully inadequate for, I think, really getting to understand someone. That's a big change, I think, for these types of treatments. We also get to educate them about, in this case, psilocybin. It's a pretty strong dose that they may get. It's a placebo-controlled trial, but it would be 25 milligrams of psilocybin, pure psilocybin, which is, depending on the mushroom type, might be thought to be about 5 grams of dried mushrooms. So we kind of educate them about that, prepare them for the potential strength of the experience, talk about mindfulness, grounding techniques, releasing and surrendering to the experience as much as possible. And a lot of the sort of theory of the psychedelic therapy is founded in these treatments, which were kind of started, as terms of the medical part of it, in the 50s and 60s, and then were shut down by the, the 1970 Controlled Substance Act, but they've been reinvigorated now in the last 20 or so years. For the dosing, we spend an 8-hour day with them. And in terms of with psilocybin, it's really meant for them to have an immersive experience where we ask the person, there's no requirements here, but to wear an eye mask. There's a playlist that with music that's thought to be conducive to psychedelic kind of journeying. And we are there absolutely for support and their safety. But with such a strong dose of psilocybin, we're not necessarily trying to have a lot of talk therapy during that dosing session, which might differ from other sort of compounds that might be used. For instance, MAPS has a different trial looking at MDMA assisted therapy, where you might have the ego more intact. Your talking might be more part of that sort of treatment during the dosing, although they also encourage lengthy periods of kind of introspection and sort of internal journeying. With MDMA, they actually do try to talk more during the sessions, and in the case of the MAPS trial, really look at their history of trauma and do that with the influence of the medicine. But with psilocybin, we're there for support and to help guide them through rough times, or if there's things they want to remember or share with us. But really, we spend the most of that day pretty quiet. And then we have 3 integration sessions afterwards, totaling 6 hours, and that's spread out over about 2 weeks of time post-dosing. And that's really a time to reflect on what happened during their dosing day experience, and start to orient themselves to, well, are there certain changes that they may or may not want to make based on what they experience subjectively. So one thing that's really differentiates this treatment probably from a lot of more standard psychiatric treatments is we're very interested in the subjective experience and feel that's very important for their healing. And not that we expect them to have any certain type of subjective experience, whether it's a spiritual experience, whether it's some sort of emotional breakthrough, memory of trauma, that it could come in many different forms. And maybe for some people they can experience healing and not necessarily have an interesting dosing day experience. So that would be okay too. But that is very pertinent to us to really explore that. And there is definitely some research trying to look more in depth into those factors and how they might influence the healing experience for people.
Thank you. Dr. Julia, you are a recovering doctor. How has your relationship with medicine changed since, leaving the field and sort of coming over into cannabis and psychedelics?
Well, actually, when I resigned, I was like, that's it, I'm done with medicine. And then I spent some time with Dr. Michelle Weiner and saw her working with cannabis medicine. And I was like, wait a second, people get better. People are on less medication. They're happy. Hold on, this is not a medicine that I'm familiar with. And what, at the end of the day, my passion was still psilocybin. So I kind of shifted gears, and my relationship to medicine has changed a lot because I realized that we're missing so much information. Like, even when I resigned, I knew that we're missing half a toolbox, but I didn't realize how valuable the tools that we were missing actually were until I started seeing, even from this trial, the shift in people's perspectives on life, their shifts in their perspectives of themselves. It's just so it's so robust and it's so quick that it's just like, how have we been ignoring this for so many years? So, as much as I want to hate on the Western model, there's so much value there too. And I think that there's a lot of times people, like me, will be on one side and then just completely shift to the other, but the real sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. And so I understand where the Western model is. A lot of the doctors working there think they're doing their best, but that's because they're doing the best that's based on the information they have, and they're missing all this information. So to me, I look at it as an opportunity to educate. There's no resentment for them not knowing any better. It's really an opportunity to pique a doctor's curiosity and then let them go online and find the information. Like, when I first started exploring all this, I thought I was on this new path, and then I go online, I'm like, wait, we've been doing this research for decades. We're just not talking about it. So essentially, for me now, it's kind of stepping back into the Western model to invite them over to this kind of new thinking. So that's where I'm at now. We'll see where I'm at in a couple of years.
Less polarization, more middle ground. Makes a lot of sense. Dr. Denise, so you're working at University of Miami. What part of the cannabis research that you're doing there are you most excited about right now?
I'm excited about all my research, just so that I'm not biased in case any of my collaborators in the audience, But I would say that I don't even know if my mic is working, so I'm holding it for decoration, I think. But I'm the most excited about our COVID research because I think much of so to take a step back, we have an international COVID cannabis health study. So anyone can go ahead and Google that, and we're still ongoing, and we have multiple waves of data collection. And unfortunately, unlike the trials, we at the university, we have lots of limitations where we're unable to actually administer the substances. So we have to really go through this observational data route. So whenever you see a scientist maybe asking if you want to fill out a survey, just think of Dr. Vito and my team out there. And in fact, I'm going to put this plug. If you go to group 805, you can actually see in live action what it looks like, what my laboratory is doing. So what I really pride myself on is that I'm really, really, really focused on training the next generation. So whatever it is that I'm learning, I make sure that I have undergraduates, which if you go to group 805, you'll see actually a high school student there. Because my laboratory includes everyone, because all of us need to know information. Similar to what Julia was mentioning, is that I'm here thinking I'm doing something new, and then I realized, no, because at the university level, I'm the first person here trying to talk about psychedelics and cannabis co-use. And I do believe that there's a way to use both of them in a productive way, unlike what's been published. However, we need evidence, and we need those people to be involved in these studies. But at the same time, we need scientists who are not in the Western model, who are not there to just do gain of function or whatever scientific terms that we can lay out there. So in short, I'm most excited that my cannabis research really transcends just one topic. It started off looking at the brain, heart, and gut, but really now it's really not only intergenerational, but involves every single system in our human body. And that's the power of this plant and fungi.
Beautiful. What a time to be alive. Booth 805. Let's go.
805.
805. Y'all know where you're going after. Dr. Scott had me at snacks if the research wasn't good enough. What are some barriers that you face in cannabis research right now?
Well, in terms of, there's a lot of barriers to research, and, Dr. Bideau mentioned some of her barriers, but even in clinical trials, there's a lot of barriers. These are what we would call like FDA registered clinical trials, and there's very sort of specific sort of processes that need to be followed to satisfy the FDA's requirements. And they're put there not just randomly or to create unnecessary burdens on people who want to develop drugs, but it's a very expensive process, number one. So we've been fortunate, our current trial's funded by a nonprofit. MAPS is another nonprofit group that seems to have a mission that I think a lot of us could relatively align with, compared to, say, sometimes the questionable motives of, say, pharmaceutical companies, not to malign anyone who is in the room, but in psychiatry in particular, we've seen our field kind of devastated by, I think, the profit motives of the pharmaceutical industry. So we need to be very attuned to those dangers in this field, and that's why it's nice to have nonprofits, but it's still really expensive. I mean, by the time you get something through the preclinical and the 3 phases, you're talking at least 50, often 100 million or more. So that's a lot of donations to have to get. Luckily, MAPS is very good at that, and there's some very wealthy donors who have been, very helpful to that end. But that's I think a really big challenge. It's been a big challenge because up until recently, pharmaceutical companies, startups, established companies didn't want to touch this stuff at all. That's why the nonprofits had to step in the first place. So besides that, the clinical trials kind of create a lot of barriers in terms of maybe ways we would like to administer psychedelic treatments, and we're able to kind of do, I think, what we consider a good enough bare minimum to administer these compounds in a way that I think does them at least enough justice. And but it'd be really interesting to say have clinical trials where spiritual people could be involved in the administering of the medicines, or you could integrate integrative techniques into the preparation, dosing, and integration process. And we can do that to a certain extent, but we can't get nearly as kind of creative as might be desired. And then the final frustration that Julie and I share a lot is they do require these to be placebo-controlled trials. So half of the participants will not get dosed with psilocybin, and that's really tough, knowing that people come in with, especially, there's a lot of hype around these medicines. People come in with a lot of expectation of healing, and there are some trials that are able to offer kind of follow-up dosings for people that got the placebo, but it's not always possible because it's so expensive to run these trials, and to do that extra step just isn't in some people's budgets. So all those sort of little artificial requirements of participating in the trials is we try to take it in stride and look at it as a necessary evil, but it's certainly very frustrating and difficult when we are confronting that in real life, and it can be very sad for us to see that necessary evil in action.
Yeah, it's almost unfortunate that the word is getting out there about the medicine faster than the medicine can get out there. But working on it. Julia, switching from a more traditional to non-traditional field, what's been your biggest learning curve in the transition?
Well, in particular with the research, the learning curve there is that, I think collectively we think of research as being a cold process. It's not a very inviting environment. It's a very procedural, and that's very important for rigor, like scientific rigor. And the thing is, when we think of a trial, we think of dose day, we think of everything that we're doing, but the biggest learning curve for this particular trial really happened when we started looking at the numbers of how many people actually, from the minute that they're interested to the minute that they're enrolled, how many people actually go through that whole process. And it made me realize that the research does not start on dose day. It starts on that first phone call. And it is our responsibility to carry these people who have willingly submitted themselves to this through the process in the gentlest way possible. And the reason why I say gentlest is because this is not your typical psychedelic, your typical mental health drug. It's not a drug like, oh, you take it, and in 3 weeks, maybe you'll feel something, answer some questionnaires, check your blood. This is something that, for the most part, people have read about it, and they're like, this is either a placebo or my life is going to change. And that is a big burden for anyone involved. So the other thing that happens is, as part of this the screening process, patients have to go through extensive questionnaires. And these questionnaires are oftentimes the same ones that the doctors administer that ask you, how much of, a terrible person do you feel like today? How much do you think that you disappointed I'm being a little extreme, but the questions are really devastating, so much so that we've had participants who finally got through to dose day, to the prep day, and they said, I almost dropped out because these questions were too much. So again, it's like, okay, this is the model that we've been working with, but this is a completely new field. So how can we shift to kind of usher this in better? And the big shift, again, I think is going to happen in maybe there's questionnaires that we can ask that aren't so devastating. Maybe the people asking the questionnaires are taught how to do it in a slightly more compassionate way, and really talking to people throughout the process, on a very different level, on a much more spiritual level. And Siegel Trials is amazing because they also recognize this need and are moving in the direction to be able to better support the people going through the study. The final thing I'll say is, to me, I think while the placebo control is great in theory, this is a 3.5 to 5 gram dose. It's very difficult to double blind a study like this. Someone's going to know something is up. And surprisingly, not always all the time. Like, there are times that, a few hours in and we had no idea. And this is, the argument for having the crossover, where if you got the placebo, you get the psilocybin the next time. The reason why that's important, not for data, this is a ethics argument. It is unethical to let people think that this is their final hope and then they got a placebo. Like, how do we hold these people with compassion? How do we make sure they don't get worse afterwards? So that's kind of the learning curve that I'm working on right now.
Everyone should get the mushrooms. So Dr. Denise, since 2017, Canada federally legalized cannabis, and there's been a windfall of legalization since then, both recreationally and medically. How has that impacted cannabis research and maybe the pace of it going forward?
It's definitely made an impact on my personal microcosm of research at the University of Miami. I think especially since I know I'm bringing up the C word and we all hate talking about COVID, but I think this pandemic really did a great job at making cannabis an essential business. And we saw that. And on March 11, 2020, I vividly recall having a meeting with my laboratory, and we were thinking, what can we do to best help our community? And when I think of our community, it's all our participants. We have over 3,000 study participants across all of our studies. So combined, what can we do to help them? And the reoccurring thing that we thought about was, where were they going to get their medicine? And then lo and behold, a few months later, cannabis became an essential business. So seeing that, I think, especially within the University of Miami, allowed me to leverage that as okay, well, listen, I'm already, because I've been doing this research for over 10 years, but in my own little circle, in a silo, and happily alone. I mean, I'd much rather do that because I've been able to move it forward. Had I been communicating to the entire university, and I'm not condoning that you do research, but I'm saying, let me clarify that actually, just in case. Had I let everyone know all my long-term plans with what my preliminary research was setting up the seeds to create, I don't think I would have been able to be doing that preliminary research. But now we're here and we're too far deep, so you can't. There's no turning back. That's actually one of the associate deans of research said that to me. They're like, Dr. Vito, you're a trailblazer. You went too far deep, because now Now other people can do cannabis research at UM. And actually, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Michelle Weiner, and I'm going to embarrass her and make her stand up. Michelle, can you please stand up? Because she can please, I'm serious, Michelle Weiner. Let me tell you, she has been there. Like, I remember, and also Julia, when we were in the office, we were like doing this nano emulsion study that still has not been approved by the University IRB. But the point is that it's that endurance. It's the endurance. And I think that those who have remained consistent and persistent are now able to really show, well, we were in it for the real reasons. And now we're ready to show. So I always make this joke that like Michelle and I have like 5 protocols already written. So the minute that it becomes, able, the university allows us to do our research, NIH is not going to even know what to do with us. And I do want to highlight that for those of you who are interested in conducting research with the NIH, I'm literally here to let you know that it's possible. Because for much of the past 10 years, it wasn't. The NIH was not funding cannabis research unless it was specifically to show the negative and toxic effects. And that was usually in mice. So if you can actually look it up now, and I encourage you to, because don't believe me, look at yourself. Look up the National Heart and Lung Institute, and you'll see there that my study, I'm funded now for a 4-year study to look at cannabis and cardiovascular disease risk. That is the first study in the history of the NHLBI. What? Like, thank you for that, but this is 2022, So the fact that that's the first study that's been funded at the R01 level, cohort study, and so what that means is that we're following these participants over time. It's very, we have a long way to go. And like Julia mentioned before, this is not new. So all we're trying to do is try to collect that evidence so that we can catch the Western side up to what we already have been looking at within many cultures. Thank you.
It's almost funny that the clandestine, like recreational market preceded the research market. Right? It's like now that you have access, you can start doing all this work.
And now that that's happening, university's like, okay, Dr. V, can you start putting a nail in your, legacy research and focus on medicine? I'm like, it's all medicine. Whether they know it or not, it's all impacting your endocannabinoid system, literally. So
it's healing, it's medicine.
But it can also, all medicine, everything that you take can be used too much, too little. So it depends on your baseline endocannabinoid system.
What floats your boat can capsize it too.
Literally.
So Dr. Scott, what's the most exciting thing that you're doing in the research field right now? What really gets you?
Oh man, that's a hard question to answer because there's so many there's so many exciting things. I think for me, what comes to mind are a lot of things, but one thing that definitely comes to mind is, as a psychiatrist, I mentioned, the difficulty that we face and my patients face in getting healing through the current model. And that's supported by numerous statistical studies now in terms of treatment resistance, recurrence of things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, not to mention schizophrenia, bipolar. So our current treatment models are failing so many people, and statistically that looks rough, but then when you're actually sitting in the room with people and just spending day after day and your models just aren't working, or third-party payers, insurances, Medicare, et cetera, don't want to pay for treatments that might be more likely to work, that takes a big toll on me as a treatment provider, seeing that suffering not being addressed. And so this is really, to me, a ray of hope, not only that psychedelic medicines and psychedelic therapy could represent a vast improvement on our currently available treatments, but also that it could open up whole new horizons for even thinking about mental health problems, and not always thinking about depression as a strictly categorical thing. Either you have it or you don't, but we all have some degree of sadness and difficulty and challenges over the course of our life. We all have some degree of trauma, and I think that psychedelic medicines really help show that. And a lot of people working in this research feel that although there are a lot of potential pitfalls to the medicalization of psychedelics, which some of the previous talks got into a little bit, that if we can prove that they're helpful for some populations, that could just be kind of a snowball rolling down a hill, and we can prove more and more people can benefit from this by using data that can help guide us in that path. And that it also can lead to, for instance, like, religion or spirituality is not really considered, in psychiatric treatments in general, diagnosis formulation. And I think that that's a big kind of gap in the way we treat people, and more integrated practices in general are starting to get recognized more. But I think that, you know, these psychedelic medicines, by the nature of how they work, are going to open up not only patients but also providers and everyone's minds into, you know, a more kind of holistic way of treating these sorts of problems.
Dr. Julia, I'm going to ask, speaking of favorites, pick a favorite. Which psychedelic medicine do you think shows the most promise in actually helping people cure their ailments?
Like from the research out there or personal experience?
Oh, let's do both. Both doors, please.
So I think one of the main things that we need to keep in mind is what is actually creating the healing. The psychedelics in general, most of them, they are simply a catalyst, because the experience that you have will only be healing if you decide to implement the insights that you had, really make the changes that you realize you need to make. So I think that if we start looking at all these molecules, it's like, oh, this one does it for this condition, this does it for that, we're really missing the point. And I'll quickly mention kind of where this thinking, for me at least, came from. We all know Prozac came online in the 80s. It was this amazing medicine because all these people who were maxed out on therapy, diets were optimized, sleep is improved, they have their community, they're still depressed, and they gave them this medicine. They're like, oh my God, they're better. So it must be a chemical thing. And over time, we've completely forgotten about the yoga, the diet, the sleeping, the healthy boundaries, and we're just giving people SSRIs hoping that they're going to get better, and they don't get better, and we're like, weird, why don't they get better? And we run the risk of doing the same thing with psychedelics. So I like the position that I have because, you know, I'm involved with the research, and we get to talk to all these companies that come in and they say, oh, we just want to do the medicine, and we're like, no, you need integration with it. If we don't start putting integration into our ketamine research, into our cannabis research, into our psilocybin research, then we might find ourselves 20, 30 years from now like, hey, I got my medicine, but it doesn't work. Well, yeah, because you're not doing all those things around it, the integration, the preparation. So I think that time will tell to see which ones are, you know, the best. I think one interesting thing to note is we all talk about ketamine being the only legal psychedelic right now. To clarify, it is not a classic psychedelic. It is a dissociative. So unlike all the other psychedelics, there was one article that listed this. It showed 4 columns. You know, you have the classic psychedelics and then MDMA and ketamine, and then 4 columns. And it was looking at nature connectedness. And the columns were at increased connection with nature, increased concern about nature, decreased connection, and decreased concern. And of all of the medicines, the only one that was a stark outlier of a decreased connection to nature and a decreased concern for nature was ketamine. And this doesn't make ketamine bad. This just means that it works differently. It is a disconnect. It is dissociative. And we are not separate from nature. We are nature. So it makes sense that it's going to disconnect us. But when the world is suffering from disconnection, is it wise to just give them this medicine and think that this is going to help them on their own? Or do we, as clinicians, as researchers, have the responsibility to create the framework to foster this connection that can happen with ketamine under the right circumstances? So they'll all work if we work with them.
What about your personal experience?
Oh, psilocybin 100%.
Back to the mushrooms. Got it. So Dr. Denise, with you know, you're obviously deep in the cannabis research field, but now the psychedelic research field is really advancing rapidly and starting to proliferate more in, you know, the mainstream eyes. What are the big differences that you might see between cannabis research and psychedelic research, or the similarities?
That's a good question. Do you mean in my research or in general?
Yeah, just in general in the field.
Well, in general, they're completely different. I think there's you can't really compare that. I think cannabis research is different because we know that it's a plant. You know, that's another thing that's kind of, you know, words matter. So when we all say plant medicine or plant and we include, you know, the fungi in there, it kind of makes me a little itchy. But no, but seriously, especially because the IRB is so focused on my words. So can you, you know, reciprocate?
That's why I'm trying to get planet medicine to catch on.
Planet medicine.
It's from the universe.
I see you now. Watch out. But no, I would say seriously, especially in my laboratory, the cannabis research, I know the mechanism like the back of my hand, endocannabinoid system. We all have it. And for those of you who may not know, especially since today is a psychedelic research panel, I just want to inform you that if you're here, you have an endocannabinoid system in your body. And with that endocannabinoid system, the plant cannabis, all of these cannabinoids, and we know at least 180 of them, have specific ways to engage with that system. And not only do we have that system, but each organ of our body has receptors, at least one of them, for that system, and it keeps us at homeostasis. So there are opportunities to overuse or underuse specific cannabinoids, especially if your baseline endocannabinoid system is set a certain way. So with the research, especially psychedelic research, in my laboratory, I'm still trying to learn, we are still trying to learn in our lab, not in everyone, what are the biological mechanisms and how do they play with the endocannabinoid system? So I have been looking on PubMed, and that's usually my first step. Go to PubMed, see what they have. And there's no research looking at how the endocannabinoid system plays with any kind of psychedelics. And even though I know that there are mechanisms of action that have been, and I know, Scott, you probably know them very well, like the back of your hand with the psychedelics, but I'm wondering, and this is a question for all of us to ponder as we go in thinking of future research, how can the psychedelics engage with your endocannabinoid system? Is there any way? We may right now, and when I ask other scientists or people who claim to be experts in psychedelics, they say, "Oh, that's a no." I also was told that it's impossible to use cannabis and psychedelics at the same time, and I have data that shows otherwise. So I'm here to find out: do psychedelics play with endocannabinoids? Let's find out. That's what my research is.
My personal anecdote says yes.
Ashe.
They're great friends.
Ashe, but we need data.
Yeah, well, working on it. So Dr. Scott, so if we're looking at the endocannabinoid system, and then psychedelics are working on 5-HT2A, B, C, serotonin, dopamine, do you think that there's an advantage to psychedelic research in more fundamentally understanding the mechanisms of action and the different things that they're working on versus mysterious, quite frankly, endocannabinoid system?
Yeah, there is that sort of research being done. They're not normally done in the context of a clinical trial. We're looking at efficacy, effectiveness, and safety of the treatments are really of paramount interest, although there are sometimes ability to kind of add on little side studies to some of that research. But there's definitely labs, Johns Hopkins, Imperial College in London in the UK, doing research, say doing things like brain imaging, and looking at brain networks. One brain network that has been of particular interest is one called the default mode network, which is what's kind of it's very active, and it's hits a lot of different areas of your brain, but it's what's active when kind of you're being you and just like daydreaming or thinking about the future or reminiscing about the past, or just kind of like that ego, that self that kind of is running. And we found that, for instance, a strong dose of psilocybin is very likely to cause the default mode network to go very quiet. The default mode network kind of really is kind of keeping a lot of the other parts of the brain in check and only letting certain parts of the brain communicate. And when we see the default mode network get quiet, we all of a sudden see a lot of areas of the brain communicating that normally don't, which may explain some of the subjective effects that we experience with our freeness of associations, or some of the sensory changes that we might have, synesthesia, seeing different musical notes, or when the senses start to overlap. So there's a lot of kind of basic neuroscience researchers who are very excited to have the psychedelics opened up more and more. Right now, almost all of them are still on Schedule 1, which makes it extremely difficult to do that research. Research such as ours, if we can get it off of Schedule 1, will all of a sudden make that research much more feasible, much cheaper for people to do. So that's really, I think, a cool thing of what we're going to be able to do with these trials. But yeah, I think a lot of basic neuroscientists are very excited to use these compounds to study the brain and other sort of systems like Dr. Vidal was mentioning, the gut and the heart and things like that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I think the DEA just actually scheduled 5 different psychedelic compounds and put them into, like, why?
That's their business. So that's why doing this research is so important to show through their own system that those shouldn't be on Schedule 1.
prove the efficacy and safety, and then you can steamroll forward. In terms of like other research outside of your personal bubble here with the Seagull trials, who else do you think is doing some really neat, innovating, interesting research, Julia?
So there's to touch on what we were talking about earlier about like the people that we miss. You're getting observational studies because you can't administer this. There's an organization called Quantified Citizen, and they partnered with Paul Stamets, who's like, I think a lot of you know the name, and they did a study through, and they called it microdose.me. I think if you go to that website, you can sign up, and they had like 8,000, I think, data points for their first study. I think they had like 15,000 data points. They like looked at the first 8,000. And the reason why this is cool is because it's not the most robust study when you're looking at it like in terms of a scientific paper. However, the data that they got, they were able to kind of tell some of the signal through the noise. And the reason this is important is because this kind of observational study will and can inform the future research that's done. And when we're working with something new, like if you have researchers that have never touched a psychedelic and they're looking at it like, oh, why don't we deliver it in this kind of, like they're looking at it completely like with no context. This gives them context. This gives them a direction to go in the research. They're able to identify potential research topics. And then the other cool thing is women tend to not be involved in studies, whether it's childbearing age or the fact that we could be 4 different people throughout the month can really impact some of that data on mental health and all that. So we get missed. And the thing that's interesting, especially with psychedelics, is if you take a psychedelic at a different point in your cycle, you might be able to get benefits that current medicine doesn't offer, whether it be cramping or severe moods. And we won't know that unless we start looking at data, and nobody's going to put in millions of dollars to study this because there's no guarantee it's going to be a good data set. So Quantified Citizen, they are going to, I think, hopefully first of many who will start to look at how do we gather data outside of the very expensive clinical model. And so that's something that I'm very excited about. And yeah.
Perfect segue to my last question, because I just got the hook off stage. In terms of so obviously you're in the lab doing a lot of research and science, but there's a lot of real world evidence out there, a la Quantified Citizen. How important do you think the real world evidence is in moving the science forward?
It's vital. Real world evidence, definitely. And I think one of the key things that she mentioned is that a lot of these, especially the scientists that are coming to it new, are acting like you can't just jump into randomized control trials. And as an epidemiologist, one of the biggest things that I teach is that there is a hierarchy of study designs, and it's like that for a reason. So we start with the observational, then we move on to case cohort or case studies, then cohort, and then randomized control trial. So, and then you make policy. But unfortunately, we've jumped all the way to policy without any of these studies. So I think it's very important for the real world, but I also think it's important for the clinical data as well. And I know we're short, so I'm going to leave that like that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to the audience for your time and attention and not throwing anything at us. Appreciate it.
All those scripted questions. Thanks, Julia. I think it's wasting more time.
Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. Test, test. Mic one, mic one, check, check. Mic one, check. Check, 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 check. Check. 1, 2.
Q. Hey, Q.
Check.
Start one.
Check on one. Check, check one. One's good. Check on two. Check on two. Two is good.
We're going to have to turn the speaker up, I think.
Copy that. Check on three. Check on three. Can you hear me? Three. Three, three, three. Check, check, check. Check on three. Check on three. Three is good.
I think we have
Check on
four.
Four. Four is good. This is four. Check on five. 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 Can you hear me on five?
I can't.
Five is good.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you back here.
I can hear the speaker.
Yeah, turn the speaker up a tiny bit.
We'll turn up the speaker.
Turn the speaker up a tiny bit. Test 1, 2. Test, 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 test. Let's try your mic one.
Mic one, check. Mic one's good.
Number two, number two, number two.
Two, check. Two, check.
Okay,
Two's good.
Good. Number three.
Three. Three, sound.
Three, good.
Three's good. Mic four. Mic four.
Four, four, four.
Four's good.
Five, five. We got five.
Check on the five. Five is good.
I got five. Let's get six.
Check on six.
Hey, Q, do me a favor. Could you go back to one for a sec?
Check on one. One's good.
Do two.
Two. Mic check two.
Okay. Okay. And we got two handhelds. Let's check the two handhelds real quick.
Check on handheld.
That sounds good.
Check on. Yep, we're good.
Okay, good.
Hi, everybody. We're going to start this up. Hey, what's up, Masha? Hey, how's George? Hey, good to see you. Thank you. I think Warren's somewhere around here. Hey,
Tony Gonzalez.
Tony,
Yes,
nice
sir.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right.
Very happy to-
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Here, come on over here. Maybe we'll even it out. Me, guys. Yes. Harry, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
I know, I'm trying. I can't sit down. I got bugs in my pants. Put this here, baby.
All right, so we're going to start this panel up. So if everybody wants to grab a seat, I'm just going to introduce everybody. I'm Zappy Zappelin, and I am going by the moniker Psychedelic Concierge these days, which seems kind of appropriate, and I think it's going to be a huge new career path for a lot of people. And so this panel is about psychedelics, cannabis, and recovery. And we've got Harry Stern from We Believe Recovery. We have Charles Patty from Myself Wellness. Jessica Morell, psychedelic nurse. And Anthony Gonzalez from Alere Emotional Health. Yeah. And so, I just want to start this with a conversation that I have a lot of times with people who are in recovery, and they have this notion that maybe if they do psychedelics, that's not sobriety. And my observation over the last few years has been that when I've been to AA meetings or NAA meetings to support a friend, and I see people there, and they're saying to me, I'm totally sober. It's amazing. I'm sober. And then I see them and they're drinking, 6 cups of coffee with 10 sugars. They're smoking their vape. They're eating a sub sandwich. They're on Xanax. And they're the whole time going, I got to get to a meeting because if I don't, I'm going to use. It's like, I'm thinking that's not a way to live. That's not sobriety. That's not a life, So what I've seen, having taken a number of people to do ibogaine in Mexico or to have ketamine treatments, when you do something like ibogaine and you really break that addiction and you change your neural pathways in your brain, then you can go around living an actual life where you're not craving and you can actually, live a good life. So I think that's really what this panel is. We've got ketamine experts here. We got cannabis experts here. And so I want to throw to them maybe the first question. What do you say to people when they say, hey, I want to be sober, but I don't know if cannabis or psychedelics are the path, because it seems like, maybe the opposite of what I'm going for. So how about you, Harry? What would you say?
I was going to be first. Wow, what an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Mr. Zappi, and a pleasure to be here with you, wonderful people. My name is Harry. I'm out of West Palm Beach. And you know what? So I worked a program, before I got into the medical marijuana field. And, my program taught me how to love people where they're at, and how to be completely open-minded. And I think a lot of people forget about that. And they tend to chastise people and make them feel unwanted or unwelcome. And I do the complete we do the complete opposite. We're followed with an amazing team that's like-minded, like myself, and we just do whatever we can to make them feel welcome and loved and appreciated. Everybody special, heavy, unique.
So, when people are in recovery, like when I personally suffered from substance abuse and alcoholism for over 20 years, and I would put some sobriety time together, and then I would always end up ultimately relapsing. And the reason is because I was so full of depression and anxiety and all of these things that I was self-medicating with different substances and alcohol. Because at the end of the day, that's what, these are all just a symptom of trauma and depression and anxiety. And we're trying to give ourselves that sense of relief. And then all of a sudden you take whatever you're self-medicating out of the equation with, and you're left with all of those feelings, and what I've noticed in my own personal journey and what we've seen at My Self Wellness is that, we do ketamine therapy. We specialize in psychedelic ketamine therapy. And it's getting to the root issue of what's making people use and abuse substances with, the depression, the anxiety, the PTSD. Ketamine is very magical because it's a dissociative. So it puts you in a disassociated state. And when this happens, it takes these blocks down that's holding back repressed traumas or feelings of depression and anxiety, things that we've stuffed in the back of our head that's causing us to suffer. And it really allows people to process it, release it, and let it go. And if it wasn't for DMT, psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine, I would have probably died an addict, and I don't take psychedelics in my journey anymore. I'm just at a place where I feel like I'm in a really good place. But what I have noticed is that we'll have people come to our facility that have 5-10 years sobriety sometimes, and they'll go through a 6-treatment package at our facility, and they get to the root issues, the traumas that they haven't been able to address because, as being in society, we're programmed to, stuff emotions. Emotions make you weak. Just keep moving forward. And that's not how we're supposed to live as human beings. So when you're taking these psychedelics in a therapeutic way and getting to the real root issues, it's causing people's level and quality of sobriety to go up exponentially.
Cool. And Jessica, how about you? How did you get to where you are and your work?
So before I found psychedelic medicine and medical cannabis, and before I found that, I worked dialysis for over 20 years. And it was an industry that, medical cannabis was frowned upon. And so it was much more acceptable for nurses to go home and drink a bottle of wine, and for that depression and that addiction to be perpetuated. It was so much more accepted for nurses to come home and drink Xanax and smoke cigarettes, and they would get extra smoke breaks, throughout the day. And so it, kind of helped me back because, in the field that I was in, you could get randomly drug screened at any time, and then definitely, you're labeled, right? And so I found psychedelic medicine, I found medical cannabis, and I was able to, like Charles said, work on the actual reason why, I was self-numbing, because I did find myself in that same cycle that I saw all these other nurses, mentors for so many years that I learned from, and I saw them drinking their lives away. And then little by little, it started off with a glass of wine, and then, a shot of whiskey, and then it just perpetuated. And I realized, how that was perpetuating, depression and all of those different things. And so it wasn't until I found these medicines that I was able to work on the things that were actually creating the issue, right? And, why not? Why can't it open this new door for me? Like, why can't it be normal for them to come home and medicate, take a gummy, or, smoke a blunt instead of, drinking a gallon of wine? You know what I mean? Like, why can't that be normal? Why can't mommy go out, and, medicate and it be a normalized thing? So, definitely, someone that's, struggling with that, teeter, it's learning how to use the medicine for its intended purposes and then walking away from it. It's not a tent, it's not a crutch, it's not another escape. It's not another numbing agent. It's actually a tool for you to be able to work on the issues and deal with the trauma, deal with the PTSD, deal with why, right? And then once you can deal with it, then you can work on it and learn new habits and replace those other habits with healthy ones. And so that's where I come from with that, so.
Awesome. So how about yourself?
Well, to the original question, I think of what would I say to somebody? And my main question is, why not? And I think because the belief systems that so many people have adopted and incorporated over the years and years of abstinence-only recovery has, I think, clouded what people are actually trying to do, which is heal. And I think to your point, the underlying, I'm probably the only person on the stage that's not necessarily an expert in psychedelic medicine per se. My specialty area is in the treatment of PTSD. I'm a therapist. I have an outpatient practice in Palm Beach and Broward County and I have a lot of extensive training in PTSD treatment. And that's all people are really, most of the time when they get to that addicted state of any substance, is they're self-medicating. We were just talking before we started that this desire to be relieved of pain, of suffering, of emotional suffering. And if we've been conditioned to believe that there's only one way to do that, then we're completely missing the point. And I think if you're thinking about underlying trauma and anxieties, to get to that root cause and to better understand where kind of that pain comes from, and if these medications can expedite that process, then the previous panel said we need to do the research to make sure we understand how to use it effectively. Because when I am working with somebody that comes to me and says, I've been dealing with PTSD for 20 years, if they're self-harming, if they're suicidal, if they're, in abusing a substance, it might take 6 months to a year before we can even start to talk about those traumas. And why do I want to, it pains me to see somebody suffer that much longer. And if these new ventures into psilocybin treatment, and cannabis treatment, even ketamine treatment, these things, if they can help expedite that process to reduce somebody's suffering in a shorter period of time, then that's the conversation I want to have with that person. So cool.
I want to maybe get into a couple of anecdotal stories that we probably all have, because I think that really hits home a lot of times. I have a company called KetaMD, which is an at-home ketamine treatment. I started it with my partner Warren Gumpel and Kaya Roman, and this is meant to be to bring it into your living room, a really good set and setting. You're guided by a nurse over telemed. But in my experience in the last 6 years with ketamine treatment, I had some incredible experiences. I treated somebody who had tried to kill themselves. They were an addict and they were tired of it and they tried to kill themselves. And when they overdosed, they pulled the plug to let them go, and the person came back, and they were really depressed that they couldn't even kill themselves right. So they were like, oh my God, I got to face my family and all this. And so they went to a rehab center that my friend owned because they were friends with them, and they said, I'm going to stay here for 45 days and try to get a hold on this. The guy who owns the treatment center here in Florida called me and said, look, Zappy, this is my friend. He said, I'm not going to tell anybody, but I want to bring him for 6 treatments of ketamine. And I'm just not going to tell anybody here. They're not going to understand it. So he brought the guy, and they told everybody he was getting work on his knee. And the guy came, gave him the ketamine. The first time he came out of the ketamine session, and he was like, oh my God, I was sitting there. And he said, Zappy, I just got it. He goes, all that stuff that happened to me, it happened to me, but it's not me. I'm me. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, I don't even think I have to go back to the treatment center. He's like, I'm going to go back because he's my friend. But he's like, I'm good. I get it now. And he went back 45 days. And my friend told me that when he checked out of the treatment center, the medical supervisor and everybody, they were around the table and they said, if everybody could be like this guy, Pat, this would be the best job in the world. And they just didn't know that the only difference was that he had done ketamine. So, it's really powerful, the things that you see. Warren Gumpel and I, we also introduced ketamine at a drug and alcohol treatment center here in Fort Lauderdale called Road to Recovery, and they were doing cannabis treatment already, and we brought our ketamine protocols to them and had, in some pretty incredible breakthroughs. We interviewed and filmed a number of young people who had been transformed, and all of them said to us, I've had anxiety my whole life, I've had depression my whole life, and I'm sitting here today telling you I do not have anxiety, I am not depressed. And to see that after just a few weeks was incredible. They brain mapped these people through a third-party company to see what was going on in their brain during the sessions and after. And some of the results were that cravings were down 60%. So you think about, wow, like the cravings, that's everything. And to be down 60% over just an incredible treatment like that is amazing. So maybe I can throw to you, what kind of amazing breakthroughs have you seen with this?
So, we have people that come in on 5, 6, 7 different medications sometimes, because, we're talking about antidepressants, benzodiazepines like Xanax, antipsychotic medications like Seroquel, street drugs, alcohol, you name it. And we have an astronomical success rate of getting people off of their pharmaceutical meds at our facility. For me personally, I used to have these peaks and valleys in my mood. I would have my highs and my lows. And ketamine actually brought me to the most cool, calm, centered, and collected place I had ever been to. We have people that have been suffering for 20, 30 years sometimes. I'll give you an example. We had a guy who hadn't left his house in almost 5 years. He was on 20 years worth of Xanax. He's drinking himself to sleep every night. After his second treatment, he comes in and he's like, I'm weaning off my Xanax. After his third treatment, he comes in and he's like, I quit drinking. He's like, I didn't come here to quit drinking. I like drinking. He's like, but I just feel so good. I don't want to do it anymore. After his 6th treatment, he bought a plane ticket and went on vacation. Okay? And I'm still friends with this guy, and it's been over a year since we treated him, and he just took another vacation. He's still doing amazing. Like, I haven't done a ketamine treatment in almost 2 years now. It's like, so like, this is causing physiological healing to the neural pathways in the brain. Science is saying it is. All right? I am not a medical expert. But that being said, though, when there is damage done to these neural pathways and the neurons are trying to flow through these pathways and they start bouncing off of the interior of the walls, it's causing people to suffer from depression, anxiety, PTSD, and a string of other things. Ketamine's going in, remapping, restructuring these neural pathways, sprouting new dendrites, causing new neuroplasticity, which are new neural connections in the brain. There's also scientific studies that are showing it's helping the brain create more dopamine naturally. So you feel good without having to take all of these other medications. And the effects are long lasting because it's not just another Band-Aid that you're throwing on something that's going to lose its cohesiveness, fall off. Now you're stuck taking a pill every day for the rest of your life. It doesn't even work anymore. This stuff really works. And like, I think what we really need to do is break the taboo that these psychedelic medicines are drugs and that it's like, oh, this is a drug and it's a party drug and people are just trying to escape with it. These are therapeutic medicines when used properly, and the results that we're getting with them are just mind-blowing. So this is definitely the future of medicine in my eyes.
How about yourself?
Thank you. So I come from an extensive recovery background, well, active addiction background, right? And I got into recovery about 6 years ago. And, there's a lot of people that walk in and out these doors, and no matter what they do, it's just always the same thing. A month or two, relapse, relapse. And it's just a crazy repetitive cycle. And again, we were one of the first to do something like that. I got some of my actually from Adam and Joseph. Joseph's the one that actually kind of forced me to do it and gave me something like, hey man, do it. It was pretty awesome. So slowly but surely, right, it was something that was kind of designed to help people to get off of a certain other medication that all these treatment centers and places were prescribing to these people. And also, like looking on the other page, with cannabis, it helps with all these symptoms, all these withdrawal symptoms. And so these people, and they would typically relapse a lot. So with cannabis, in my opinion, would help slow them down a bit before they become so impulsive and go out and do something, or they automatically feel feeling after 1 or 2 months, and they start to get some of their emotions back. Like, oh, F this, I don't want to feel like this, and they go out and they do what we know how to do best, self-medicate. And from my experience, it's been beautiful to watch. A lot of these people just slow down, take a breath, hang out. It's not like your typical meeting atmosphere. They wait for each other to get home from work, and hey, man, I got some of this, I got some of this. Before you know it, they're sitting around the bonfire talking about their day. Now they're hungry, got the munchies, go inside, and guess what? You make it through another day successfully, which was extremely difficult to do at times. We couldn't sit still for it. And these guys are sitting still today, and they're getting over a year and a half of consistent recovery. And it's super amazing to sit there and watch them, get their families back and build a relationships with their parents and their kids, and getting their kids back, move out and get their own place and keep a job for a year and a half. These things were impossible to us. And I was like, what? I was lucky to keep a job for 2 months, for 25 years. And it's just a beautiful thing to watch, man. And there's so many stories just like that. I'm not too much into the psychedelic part of things. I guess we haven't got there yet. I don't know too much about it, but just experiencing the medical marijuana is just a beautiful place to be, and I'm grateful to be a part of something so special and beautiful in our community. I think that's such a good point, because when we think about, at least for me as a clinician, when I think about addiction, I think about life being out of control, life being unmanageable. And if there's something that will help reestablish a sense of control, then again, why would we question it, or why would we prevent somebody from being able to use it effectively in a controlled setting? I think about, I have a handful of people that I've helped with integration after ayahuasca treatments, after psilocybin journeys, and a handful of people that I work with that use medical marijuana medical cannabis as their main medication now. And it's fascinating to see the shift that they have and how they see themselves. Because ultimately, when I'm working with people that have severe PTSD, part of the why they go into addiction or use in the first place, and it becomes so unmanageable, because they're essentially trying to avoid the feeling. They're trying to avoid the memories. They're trying to disconnect from that deeply, deeply painful part or parts of their life. And so the fascinating thing for me is with these medications, it actually brings those barriers down. I'm not getting too much into the neurobiology and neuroscience of this, but there's a specific effect in the brain that it says, I'm not as afraid to confront these things. And the experience, particularly with psilocybin and MDMA, is that it increases the brain's ability to process emotion. And so this kind of inversion of what happens with PTSD, when you're experiencing a flashback or an intense trauma or anxiety response or panic response, the brain emotional processing goes down and the survival response goes way up, which it says, I don't want to feel none of that shit. Excuse my language. and so if we can invert that through the use of these medications and give the ability to expose themselves to these emotions more safely and reprocess these emotions more safely, ultimately there's less and less and less over time. There's less of a need to avoid. And therefore, I won't be dependent upon these things anymore. I won't need to escape my life because I actually feel comfortable with me at that point. And so, not to get into specific clients, but I mean, I've seen multiple people in my practice over this last several years that have had that experience and are living full lives at this point, which is amazing to see. And I just hope that the more research and the more evidence that comes out, and I'm sure there's going to be a great deal of policy discussions over the course of the weekend, that becomes accessible to more and more people responsibly.
Awesome.
Well, I can speak on my journey, and when I started psychedelic medicine, prior to that, I had been fighting off and on, not wanting to take my antidepressants, or not wanting to be on Xanax, or fighting panic attacks. And first time I had a panic attack, I was 10 years old. And I used to figure skate, and I remember my mom used to pop half of Xanax under my tongue before competition. And this was normal. And so I grew up like this. I grew up like trying to figure this out. Like I knew there was more to having to take this medication. And unfortunately, I got to the place where I was hospitalized. And so I was offered ECT therapy because my medication was no longer working. And I really felt like there was more to this story. Like this wasn't it for me. And prior to this, I had already retired from dialysis and I had already been a yoga instructor, but I actually wanted to go into it. And I was able to bring yoga and meditation to the public school system. But then COVID hit. And then, blessing in disguise, I found this amazing facility that was going to offer ketamine therapy. And they were looking for a nurse, and they had no idea I was a nurse. So when I found ketamine therapy, it was a lifesaver for me, where nothing else was able to reduce the inflammation in those NMDA receptors. Nothing else was giving me that feeling of love and that motivation to want to put in the work and really want to fix, my trauma and figure out why and do all of those different things. And so when I found that therapy and when I saw what it was doing for me, I was able to start weaning myself off my own medication. I stopped drinking. After my third treatment, I stopped smoking cigarettes. I've been medication free. Let me rephrase. I was also self-medicating with over 250 milligrams of Benadryl a night, okay? And this was to try to get me to go to sleep. And so it wasn't until I started these medicines, it wasn't until I started psychedelic therapy that I was able to finally be in a place where I've been off my medication for 2 years now. And so I'm in a place where I'm sharing this medicine. I'm seeing that other people are able to have the same results, and they're able to I'm able to share my journey with them, and they're able to see, find hope finally. Where I remember some patients walking in, and I remember seeing myself that same way. Like I had come to a place where I'd lost hope. And we're now in a place where patients are finding hope. And it's just so beautiful to be able to have come through this path and now be able to share this same medicine that was able to save my life.
Awesome. Yeah. So I want to, I'm going to show some slides later when I do my 5 o'clock speech, but just some basic science on the ketamine, because we are talking about ketamine in the moment, that you have this area of your brain that people have heard of called your default mode network. And in there's this little mechanism called your lateral habenula. And that's basically recording all the stress you've ever had in your whole life. When it becomes too much, your brain goes into this burst mode, which is a completely different brain state. And when your brain's in burst mode, it shuts off your dopamine production. And that means that you're getting no dopamine, which is your happiness, your motivation to do anything. It's gone. And luckily for us, science has shown that the first time you do medical ketamine, it takes your brain out of burst mode. You immediately start getting your dopamine back. So, at CatMD, we have all these phone calls we get the next day from the husband or the wife, and they're like, "Oh my God, he just cleaned the attic." Like, he's been claiming he's going to do that for 5 years. Keep doing it, So it's really fun. I mean, it's one of the most rewarding things you can be involved with, because, if you're in something like weight loss or traditional mental health, it can take months and years to see some kind of an effect. Here, we're talking about, an hour, days, weeks, to see massive change. And that's so gratifying as somebody who's involved in it. And so I want to say, I think an important part of psychedelic or cannabis therapy is the set and setting that you're in. And I've been down to Myself Wellness, and it is an amazing set and setting that they've created. They have an amazing doctor, Andrew Ferber, who's like some kind of a, I don't know, some kind of a saint, but he's close to 90 years old, and he is just, on the cutting edge still. So a lot of the healing that takes place, I think, has a lot to do with the set and setting. And so I'm curious, you know, how you guys think about set and setting in your practices as part of like why people wind up, you know, having such breakthroughs.
So, like I said earlier, I'm not too familiar with the ketamine process, but as far as our set and setting, right, we do our best to create an atmosphere that people feel loved and welcome. We are a company that has mixed amount of programs, about 120 beds. We have about 15 houses that we work with, that we create just a happy place for them to be. You know, we create meetings and things like that for them to come to and be about, feel loved and welcome. We encourage the guys and the females at all the houses, you know, to definitely get to know one another, and they hold each other accountable. Two people live in one bedroom, so they are forced to interact with each other, and we create activities for them to have within the household so that they learn how to depend on one another. So it helps create camaraderie and you know, build friendships, man, because a lot of us don't know how to interact, right? At least where I come from, you know, in my literature, it states that we become animalistic in nature. You know, we're savages out there, you know, and then we forget the trust, we forget the love, we forget, you know what I mean? All that is just far away. You know what I mean? And I can't wait to see what, you know, really comes about from all this. You know, I'm just in a little piece of something obviously very special and beautiful, man, and I just can't wait to see like what it has to offer, you know, our community, right? It's something that's really stigmatized, you know, like you mentioned earlier, and something that I wanted to mention that I feel like I left out by accident was talking about the medication. We're talking about people that are 13 or 15 different medications coming down to 1 or 2 or none in some instances. That's huge. That's huge. We're talking about people that are now functioning, that were walking zombies, you know, just one foot in front of the other and just doing what they have to do in their daily thing, and like emotionless, and you know, just learning how to just love and experience life. You know, we bring animals into the home, you know what I mean? And allow like one property has their own dog or cat, both, you know, and it's just beautiful to watch. Really, I could talk about it for days.
Sounds like a cool set and setting. Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for the kudos, Zappy. I appreciate you. And honestly, thank you for everything that you've done in this industry. If nobody's seen The Reality of Truth or the movie Reborn, I highly suggest that you watch either of those. This gentleman right here has been paving the way in the psychedelic field for a really long time. Set and setting is so important. So very important. It's almost as important as the medicine. You know, it's like, what we do at My Self Wellness is it's not your typical doctor's office. We are probably, as we tried to be, the farthest thing away possible from that, with still being a medical facility. It's more of like a day spa feel. We have an amazing integration room for people to integrate back after their experiences. We have personal rooms with recliner chairs. One thing that is special about us is that every single person that works at our facility has firsthand experience healing with the medicine, also healing with other psychedelics as well. So we really take a hands-on approach and hold people's hands through the process of these treatments. And, you know, there's one thing really special about, like, you know, where I've had people that come in and they've sat in a ton of Aya ceremonies, or they've had healing with other plant medicines and other sets and settings, and they come in and they feel like they can really let their guard down at our facility. And like, that's when the true healing is really going to happen. I had one girl that came in and she got treatments, and she's like, I've actually had people try to like hook up with me during eye ceremonies or whatever while I was under the medicine. And, you know, and she felt, and she had done a lot of eye ceremonies, and she felt like coming in and doing the ketamine therapy at our facility, where like she could really just let her guard down, know that she was in a safe place. We, you know, have cameras in all the rooms that we monitor, but nobody has to be in the room with you because we do have all eyes on it. But, you know, being in a place or being around people that where they're, you know, because in my eyes, everything is made of energy, and there's like an energetic communion with the place you're with, or the place you're at, or the people that you might be integrating your experiences back with. And integration is just as important as the medicine and the setting as well. But being able to be in a place where you can really let the medicine do its job and feel like you're safe is so incredibly important when it comes to psychedelic therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm very blessed to work very closely with Charles at Myself Wellness. And so, yes, it is the setting. But another big thing that we do at Myself Wellness is we build trust. And we let the patient know how safe they are. And I think that by building that trust and that relationship with the patient, they know that we've all connected with the medicine as well. We've all come from the same path. And so they're able to kind of, just like Charles said, let their hair down and kind of let themselves, surrender to the medicine. We have cameras, we have call buttons, we have monitors, we have all kinds of different mechanisms to make sure and ensure safety for the patient. And I think that that's the biggest thing, is to ensure that safety for that patient and make sure that the patient knows that they are our number one priority. And so that ability to feel safe, and it allows the person to surrender. And I think that that's the biggest thing with psychedelic medicine, is to be able to surrender and let go. And that has a huge impact. And then another thing is the reintegration. We have an amazing therapist that connects with our patients, and they love that. They love the ability to be able to come in and check in with her, and they know that if for any reason they need any one of us, we're there. The doctor's there. We're constantly working very closely together, and if for some reason, somebody hits that call button, there's 3-4 people, rushing to that door, and possibly there's probably already somebody in the door before even that patient hit that call button, because we've been watching so quickly, so they know, they feel loved, they feel protected, and so I think that's a huge factor for them in that ability to be able to surrender to the medicine so that the medicine can do the work.
Y'all took all the good answers. just kidding. I just want to echo that. I mean, I went through the MAPS training to become a MAPS therapist, and hopefully to get that certification when I can participate in the clinical setting at some point. But I personally would argue that setting is even more important than the medication itself. Because of what Jessica just said, because ultimately, if we are trying to overcome the impulse to numb out and disconnect, then there first has to be an establishment of trust and safety. And that I feel okay exposing this part of myself that I've been trying to hide from the world for so long. That I feel safe talking about this event that happened to me, or this traumatic relationship that I experienced growing up, or more recently, that I have to feel an environment of non-judgment. I have to trust that this environment will be accepting of whatever I put out for the world to witness. And so to me, if that's not established first, if that isn't consistent to that individual's needs, to that individual's culture, to that individual's preferences, then while the medication might work some, it's not going to achieve its full potential into reestablishing those neural networks of safety and trust. Because ultimately that's what anxiety is. I don't feel safe. That's what trauma is. I feel like this thing will happen to me again if I don't keep all these protective barriers up. And so in order to let that guard down, there has to be that fluid interchange of trust and safety within that environment. So
I just want to say anecdotally one more time that, some of the stories that you see are they're so confirmational. Warren Gumpel and myself started something called the Ketamine Fund, where we've been raising money for giving veterans free treatments of ketamine. We've given about 500 plus treatments to veterans. And some of those guys, one of them in particular I'm thinking about, he was on 20 medications from the VA. He was suicidal, he was homicidal, and he was trying to get in shootouts with the police and that kind of thing. And he was just in the last ditch moment of his life, and came in, did the ketamine infusion. This is in Utah. He did the ketamine infusion, injection was an intramuscular, and he said that after the treatment, he came out of it and he said, I felt hope for the first time. And he said he went home and he hugged his kids and he said he felt love for the first time in like 10 years. And so we're talking about something that can have that kind of effect. He's weaned off his medications. He does his ketamine boosters and things. But, you know, as we're talking a lot about ketamine, I want to just bring the conversation to ibogaine, which some of you may know or may not know, but this is really going to be the one for recovery. This is one that's known that in, you know, 1 24-hour treatment, you can break a heroin addiction, a meth addiction, alcohol, you know, whatever it is, it's going to break you. And it does that by physically rebooting you and then also doing a mental reboot on you. It's an African root, and they figured this out quite a long time ago. And I think the reason it's not totally accessible has to do a lot with the recovery system that we have here in the United States. That depends quite a bit on people relapsing and coming back and the money that's involved with that, that people don't necessarily want you to get better in 24 hours. And so I think we really have to try to, you know, be a bit more radical right now as a community and say, hey, we're demanding the right to go inside our own minds. We're demanding right to these natural plants. We're not going to sit around and talk about it like we have cannabis for years and years. We have a mental health crisis going on, and we're demanding the right to, you know, heal ourselves. So ibogaine, incredible medicine. And, you know, I think, again, if we can just kind of, you know, figure out how to get more radical here and to demand this right, I think that's going to help us all. So I don't know if anybody has any experience of dealing with people who've had ibogaine experience to speak to that, but
I know ibogaine is doing amazing things for people. I'm going to say like DMT as well. Like I kicked a 6-year heroin addiction from a DMT experience. Okay. I mean, and, you know, so DMT is changing the game for it as well. And ketamine is, I mean, the ketamine for people with addiction issues, it's mind blowing. Like, you know, we have people coming to our facility that don't come in to quit drinking, that, you know, like we had a couple people that we had a guy who came in suffering from severe depression, and halfway through his treatments, another one where he's just like, I quit drinking. After his treatments, he still hasn't drank. Like a month later, he just sent his wife in. She actually quit drinking through the process of her treatments also. And if you guys are here tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we're actually doing a screening of our documentary Lighter. It's about psychedelic ketamine therapy. It's got my story in it. Our amazing owner of My Self Wellness, Christina, my fiance, story. She talks about the facility. And we also have some of our clients in it as well that we've treated. So it's really going to hopefully change some view on ketamine therapy and really help break the taboos.
I was to say that I don't necessarily have any deeper knowledge of ibogaine, but I think one of the things you pointed to, which I do have an opinion on, is that the addiction industry model that is problematic, whether it's from treatment facilities that require the revolving door, or insurance companies that on some level don't want to support it over the long term. All that is true, but I also think there needs to be a cultural shift more on the ground level, within the rooms, within on some level within 12-step recovery, that says if you're taking an antidepressant, you might not be sober. And I think that conversation needs to start happening more around, like, what is the impact, what is the effect of these things? If we're actually to overcome addiction, we have to look at all available channels, not just the ones that we've historically said work. And so that sense of taboo, to that sense of stigma, but that will need to come with pioneers like you all that are saying, like, we're willing to take these risks to collect the data that says this works.
Just so everybody knows, Bill Wilson, the co-founder with Dr. Bob of Alcoholics Anonymous, used LSD to heal his depression. Okay. And when it comes to Zappy's first question, which I'm sorry I didn't touch on properly, when it comes to like a relapse, this is what I tell people that come into our facility and ask, like, you know, like, well, what do you think about ketamine? And is this a relapse? I'm like, do you think that Bill Wilson started his sobriety date over again when he used LSD to heal himself? No, because it's all about the intention that you're putting behind these medicines. What intention do you have? Am I looking to escape, or am I using this medicine as a therapeutic, you know, compound to try to heal myself from something that working the 12 steps and going to meetings continuously, and I'm still full of depression. I still have anxiety, and I'm white knuckling it through my days trying to stay sober, but I'm miserable, and so like that's why I'm, for anybody that's in recovery, for anybody that's thinking that this might be a relapse, it really isn't. It can give you a better quality of life in your recovery than you possibly thought you could have had.
Yeah, and I'll just throw out there too, that psilocybin mushroom microdosing is probably going to eliminate all of the antidepressants out there. And the folks that I've seen that have started to microdose, those folks wind up breaking not only depression, but addiction as well. So I think we have to, just as a group, just again, demand this right and speak from experience, because I think there's not necessarily a conspiracy of the medical establishment to keep these things away. I think it's a total lack of education. In the same way that most doctors don't know anything about nutrition, which could solve all the problems that they're trying to solve. If you've ever been to a hospital and seen the food they're serving, it's pretty clear they don't know about nutrition, and they just don't know about these plant medicines and these different therapies. So we, the psychedelic community, the psychonauts, we're the ones that have to, explain this and participate in the conversation, because they don't know it right now, and it's our job to, educate the society.
Thank you, Zeppy. In the anonymous programs, right, the percentage rate has gone from 5% to like 3%. That's a 96% rate of failure. And if there's other options, harm reduction has a 10 to 11% success rate, and that alone is something that's worth to take a look at. I got a higher percentage rate to get better in my life and get my kids back and my family back and keep a job, and hopefully one day do whatever you dreamed of doing. You know what I mean? Like, I'll take it, okay. Something you should definitely take a look at. And I love pushing back. I do that all the time. We do that all the time, man. We get a lot of. And just to speak to the at least in the studies that are coming out from the MAPS research, there's actually no evidence across all three phases of people becoming addicted to MDMA post completion of their treatment. None. Zero. And so the idea that using a potentially addictive drug to treat addiction is problematic is actually, there's no evidence of that yet proven. So we need, to your point, Zappy, of educating and keeping the data out front is, that to me, is the most important part, because that's what's going to break the stigma ultimately long term. And to my man's point, and actually help people, because spontaneous recovery percentages are higher than 12-step. And I know a lot of people personally, clients, my own family, that have been helped by 12-step recovery. But if it's 2 to 3%, spontaneous recovery is close to like 4%. People just waking up one day and saying, I'm done. And so so I think following this information and saying that my mind says that this is the way, but there is no, right now, at least the research is saying, there's no evidence that people are becoming addicted to these medications when they use them properly, with the proper intention, with the proper support.
There's a Russian scientist, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he actually did a study with, he did it with opioid addicts, but he also did it with alcoholics. And they took them, and it's about long-term sobriety, what he's talking about with the 3 to 5%. And they actually gave these guys ketamine treatments, okay? And it went from that low percentage of long-term sobriety to 62%. I actually just did the research. I looked it up again the other day so I could talk about it. 62% with long-term recovery from that low percentage. So this stuff is going to change the game when it comes to the recovery community and long-term sobriety, and actually getting to the root issues of why people keep relapsing.
Yeah. So did you want to comment on that? Okay. I just want to make a comment that, having gone around to all the ketamine clinics in the country over the last few years, meeting with doctors who've done, 60,000 infusions, 40,000 infusions, they basically say that no one's ever come into the clinic for depression and become addicted. What happens is, when people are abusing drugs and you give them some ketamine, of course they're going to abuse it. It's going to be gone in 5 minutes. But when you take ketamine recreationally in a club or something and you're snorting it, it's actually hitting your opiate receptors and you're getting a response that can trigger an addictive situation. So again, this is just kind of separating the taboo from the real medical, and the situation is such that, you know, we just have to help people to relabel these things as, you know, medicine versus drugs and real sobriety. And I think so. Any other comments? I don't know how we're doing on time, but I would love to hear any comments you guys have on where you think the future of this is going to go.
Where's the doctor's office?
So in our KetaMD business, what we feel like is, you know, everybody should have access to this, where right now there are infusion centers where, you know, it can cost $500 to $1,000, which, you know, if you're in Beverly Hills or New York City, that's attainable for some people and they're getting a lot of benefit. But we want to make this available to everybody anywhere in the country and try to make it more cost effective for them to access. So with KetaMD, what we thought was, rather than creating more offices, which again is not necessarily the best set and setting, it's not a great experience, because when you do go to an office to do it, somebody has to drive you there and drive you back. You have to take the time off, which a lot of people can't really do. You have to go in during office hours and things like that. Just not the best experience. And just, you know, you see a guy in a white coat and you start to get nervous and all that. So to be able to do these ketamine now with the lozenge, that has been proven that if you give somebody a lozenge, it's not going to be as bioavailable as giving them a shot. But if you give them the right dose, they're going to metabolize enough of it to dissociate, because ketamine is a dissociative. So it's basically, it's not a hallucinogenic where the walls are melting. It just dissociates your left and right brain and allows you to communicate without maybe your ego getting involved. So our thought process is, let's bring it into the home. Let people do it at night, weekends, lay in their own bed. Nobody drives them. And for that reason, we're able to drive the cost down to be, you know, a couple $100s per treatment. And I think really we have to, you know, especially with coronavirus, I don't know that people necessarily want to go sit in a doctor's office with a bunch of people around them, you know, coughing and that kind of thing. So, you know, I love the clinics like my Self-Wellness, where they're creating an incredible environment, because that's really going to help you in a big way. And I think the second, you know, the important thing we have to do is just open up access by letting people do it at home. It wears off so fast, the half-life, that you can lay in your own bed and an hour later be up, you know, talking to your kids and doing whatever you're doing. That's like an important moment for this industry.
So one thing we're actually doing in my Self-Wellness Center also is we actually started group-assisted ketamine therapy, where we have our integration room cleared out and we will sit around people around like on comfortable mats on the floor, like an Aya ceremony, basically, except for it's led by a medical team with our therapist, Hannah, present. And basically we've cut what Zappy was talking about is we've cut the cost less than 60% of what it would do to personal room treatments. And as far as more doctor facilities, you know, in the future, look for a My Self-Wellness near you.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I mean, I think we're talking about everything here from ibogaine to ketamine to psilocybin to cannabis, and they all have their place in the recovery process. And I think, you know, what concerns me a lot is that, about ketamine specifically, is that a lot of the doctors that are administering it have never had it themselves. And so, you know, what we've known for a long time is that people they have like 5 questions they need answered. You know, is it scary? How am I going to feel after? What am I going to be like tomorrow? How long is it going to last? It's like, those are the questions. They walk into this traditional doctor clinic and the doctor's never done it. Their staff's never done it. And they ask these questions like, I don't know, but it seems to work. I don't know. Sit down over there and, you know, get the shot, you know? And so I think we just really have to educate the medical establishment, because that's where it's kind of breaking down. I think we're all, you know, open to all kinds of alternative medicines and think that all of them have value. And I think if you look at them, they each have a piece of the recovery puzzle to them. And if you know, as a psychedelic concierge, the idea is to, you know, talk to somebody about their intent, what their traumas are, and then to make a recommendation. I have a movie out with Lamar Odom that I'm going to show the trailer to later, and his formula was ketamine plus plant medicine plus a daily practice like meditation or breathing equals a conscious transformation. And I think, you know, if you're having, you know, if you're out of touch with nature, you might need some San Pedro. If you're lost your thrill for life, maybe you need some psilocybin microdosing. If you're, you know, on the edge of, you know, killing yourself, maybe you need some ketamine and ibogaine if you're deep in addiction. So I think we just have to all work together as a community. And then cannabis, again, I've been, you know, using cannabis for 30 years every day. So I'm an advocate, but I don't necessarily think it's going to save the world. I think we're going to have to use these psychedelics that can, you know, really remap your brain in order for people to handle the kind of, you know, information and media and all the shit that's coming at everybody every moment. I think our brains aren't even necessarily set up for that. So we have to use the ones that you need, and it has to be a, you know, like good medicine, it has to be personalized. And I think that's, you know, what, when you work with somebody like a psychedelic nurse or a psychedelic concierge or clinic, you're going to be able to figure out what you need. Cannabis, some people it might be sativa, some indica, some hybrid. You don't, you know, it's really, you need a professional. And that's like what I think we're finding here at Cannadelic, is that there's a lot of people have a lot of knowledge, and I think we just have to, you know, bring this to the medical establishment now. So we're going to wrap it up, and thank you for being here. Appreciate it.